Chapter 832. Faced with such a mysterious, terrifying, and tyrannical spatial divine power, Ron felt an unprecedented pressure. He took a deep breath, and the familiar face of the Lich King Hermes appeared in his mind. Lord Lich King, you are right. Because of the depravity of the undead, I need to strengthen my faith. Ron's eyes suddenly became clear. He slowly raised his trembling hand, and a hard-to-understand incantation came out of his mouth. Even the knowledgeable Homelin had never heard of this incantation before. Death Domain. A black energy spread out, rapidly expanding in the space created by Klein. The laws of space and the laws of death intertwined with each other, fiercely colliding with each other like two armies at war. Spatial divine power and death divine power broke through the void, constantly spreading out in all directions. A black sphere slowly unfolded in the sky, forming a huge area of low pressure. Like a ball of air, it revealed a spatial crack that constantly twisted like a snake. Very quickly, the laws created by the divine power of death gained the upper hand, swallowing Klein's spatial divine power in an instant. What? Impossible! Klein was shocked to the extreme. How was this possible? This is the spatial divine power bestowed upon me by Lord Utaris, Klein shouted in his mind. He used his spatial divine power with all his might, but his domain was rapidly shrinking. Klein was using the spatial divine power bestowed upon him by Utaris, while Ron was using the divine power of death that he had painstakingly cultivated. The difference between the two was obvious. Klein bit his lip until it bled. He never thought that he would fall under Ron's death domain once again. His mind was greatly shaken, and his spatial divine power collapsed. Boom! Finally, after a violent spatial tremor, Klein's figure slowly staggered. A trace of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, quietly floating in the air. It was a ghastly sight. Ron won. Homelin smiled faintly. At this moment, he finally let out a sigh of relief, while the people of the Scourge Church cheered. Klein understood that he had lost once again. He had lost so thoroughly. Even if he used the spatial divine power bestowed upon him by the god of space, he still suffered a crushing defeat. Klein calmly looked at Ron's figure in the void, his eyes emitting a bone-piercing hatred. He hated the same necromancer, but Ron's strength was far above his. How was this possible? He was only a human. My noble race of the undead, in the cultivation of necromancy. How could I not be as good as a human? No. I won't lose. My noble race of the undead, how could I lose to a human? In an instant, Klein's face turned sinister. Ha ha, Ron. Do you think you've won? You ha ha. I lost. But you must die. Just when everyone thought that the battle was over, Klein laughed wildly. His left hand grasped the void, and the last trace of spatial divine power blasted into the sky. Boom! With a loud bang, a large hole suddenly appeared in the pitch-black sky. A white figure slowly descended from the whirlpool that was constantly spinning. It was a middle-aged man with a dignified appearance. His whole body exuded an overbearing aura. He wore a straight white formal robe with golden tassels hanging on his shoulders. The hem of his tuxedo hung down to his knees, and he wore a pair of tall black boots. He looked extremely valiant. Who is he? Suddenly seeing this human man, everyone from the Scourge Church was stunned and asked each other. Ron's nerves were even more tense. Utalis did not reveal his body and restrained most of his power. At this moment, he looked just like an ordinary human. After he descended above Pompeii City, his divine sense swept around, and the corners of his mouth curved slightly. Klein, my dear son, why did you summon me? Is there a reason? The Sky Dragon, who had transformed into a human, had his hands behind his back. He smiled slightly with an arrogant face and slowly opened his mouth, as if he did not put anyone in his eyes. Son, he is Utalis. Everyone's hearts rumbled, as if a thunderbolt had flashed. Of course, they had heard of the name Eudalis. In the center of all the major cities of the Noah continent stood huge statues of the sky dragon, but this was the first time they had seen a sky dragon in human form. Who was Eudalis? He was a divine beast. To be exact, he was a god. Although he belonged to the category of magical beasts, his power was comparable to that of a god. Seeing Eudalis appear, everyone's hearts sank to the bottom in an instant. No matter how strong Ron was, he was still a mortal. The person in front of them was a real god. God. This was a god, a supreme god. He controlled the law of space and controlled the life and death of everyone. Compared to Eudalis, the divine power of space that Klein used was not worth mentioning at all. After the battle between Eudalis and Noah, although he defeated Noah, he was seriously injured. At present, he was hiding in a space somewhere in the Noah continent to recover from his injuries. After receiving Klein's summon, he hurried over. Eudalis used the law of space. No matter where he was, he only needed a thought to penetrate space and appear in front of everyone. Yes, Father. At this time, Klein took a few deep breaths and his pale face flushed red. He bowed deeply. Originally, your son did not want to disturb you, Father. But now, Klein urgently needs your strength. At this point, Klein's gaze gradually moved downwards. When it fell on Ron's face, a strong killing intent suddenly flashed in his eyes. Kill Ron! A murderous aura filled the entire city, as if even the wind had stopped. Millions of undead were silent, waiting for the order of the summoner. Oh! Eudalis followed Klein's gaze, and when it fell on Ron, he could not help but be startled. Undead? Yes, divine Magus Necromancer. Klein clenched his teeth and looked at Ron with intense jealousy in his eyes. This guy is very strong. Even someone as strong as Klein had to admit that Ron was much stronger than him. If Ron was only a little stronger than him in the last battle, the current Ron was more than twice as strong as him. He had already stepped into another realm, a realm that even Klein had not stepped into. Eudalis sneered. He's just a divine realm expert. No matter how strong a divine realm expert is, he can't compare to a high and mighty god. Father will take care of him for you. For Eudalis, killing a divine realm expert was easier than crushing an ant. He had even killed Noah, so how could a mere necromancer do it? Therefore, Eudalis did not need to talk nonsense with Ron. He was just a divine realm expert, so he could just kill him. As for the others, he simply ignored them. Ron's expression changed. What should come, would come. He clenched his fists, the fighting intent in his eyes not diminishing in the slightest as he sneered. God? Let me see the so-called power of God. Eudalis clasped his hands behind his back, a smile still hanging on his face, but the killing intent between his eyebrows gradually condensed. At this time, Ron only felt his breathing stop. The surrounding space began to distort, and his movements became slow. What? By the time Ron reacted, it was already too late. He saw a sphere condense around him, isolating space. Eudalis had the ability to control space, so he did not need to do anything. The power of space he controlled covered the sky and pressed down on Ron. Boom, 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 space began to collapse, as if the whole world had been turned upside down. Countless space fragments constantly pressed down on Ron, and the powerful pressure could crush hard rocks into powder. Between heaven and earth, divine power fluctuated, and huge cracks appeared, constantly shining in the night sky. The high undead around Ron, whether it was the frost dragon or the skeleton emperor, all turned into a cloud of smoke and disappeared under this huge force. Divine power was the law, and the law was divine power. This was what Ron had comprehended in Bartlos prison. Eudalis manipulated the powerful law of space and transformed it into a terrifying force, crushing Ron in a breath. In the face of Eutalis's terrifying power, Ron's expression remained calm. God is really powerful. If I were the me a few months ago, I would have been helpless against Eutyles, but now, death and withering. Ron's eyes suddenly flashed with a bright light. Powerful death divine power came out of his body, forming a powerful magnetic field that resisted Eutylus's space divine power. A powerful corrosive aura penetrated space, and under the constant devastation of the death divine power, the space created by Eutylus's divine power exploded in an instant. The two powerful forces collided, and for a moment, a terrifying force spread out, turning into a powerful shock wave that swept across the area. How is this possible? This time, not only Klein, but even Eutyles was a little shocked. An ordinary powerhouse of the realm of the gods could actually resist the power of a god? No matter how strong a powerhouse of the realm of the gods was, they were still mortals. How could they compare to a god? How is this possible? Ron, he actually has the power to match Lord Eutyles? Klein's hands and feet were cold, and his body trembled violently. He looked at Ron with jealousy, unwillingness, and fear. Why did he become so powerful? Why? On the other side, the people of the Scourge Church once again had hope in their hearts. Eutylus's expression became grave, and a trace of shock flashed in his eyes. He asked in a deep voice, "Who the hell are you?" "Me? Who?" Hearing this, Ron laughed. "Eutyles, I know you are a high and mighty god with the power to destroy everything." Chapter 833. What? Everyone was stunned. Even Eutyles was stunned. But looking at Ron's confident appearance, it didn't seem like he was bluffing, especially when Eutyles used his spatial divine power just now. Not to mention Eutyles, who was over 100,000 years old, even Klein was several thousand years old. But how old was Ron? Ron was a human who didn't have extraordinary talent or a long lifespan. He was only around 30 years old, yet he had become a god? Even Klein was surprised and doubtful. Ron had really become a god? How was this possible? How old was this guy? That's right, Ron had indeed broken through. While in Bartlos prison, Ron had sensed the danger of the Noah continent. When he defeated Klein and wanted to return to the Noah continent, he discovered that the entire Noah continent had been sealed off by a power. Needless to say, this was Eutylus's masterpiece. With his spatial divine power, sealing off a secondary plane wasn't very difficult for him. This sealing power was extremely powerful, leaving Ron helpless. At this time, he immediately calmed down and focused on cultivation. This way, he had an unexpected harvest. After comprehending the mysteries of life and death, and controlling the laws of death, Ron's mental realm had taken a qualitative leap. Now, he could use the divine power of death as he wished without the blessing of another god. Gods were 1 in 10,000, and even a secondary plane might not be able to produce a god. The birth of a god required all kinds of conditions, and even an entire secondary plane couldn't meet these conditions. What a god focused on was the improvement of one's realm and the control of laws. When a kind of power reached the limit, it would turn into a law, and if one could control this law, they could become a god. After talking with Klein, Ron was suddenly enlightened. After concentrating on cultivation, in just a few short months, he surpassed his original strength and reached a realm that even Klein couldn't reach. That was a deity that controlled the laws. With this power, the confident Ron easily broke through the spatial seal and returned to the Noah continent. You've really become a god? The god of death, who controls the laws of death? Klein clenched his teeth as his blood-red eyes stared at Ron. Anger, unwillingness, jealousy, and all sorts of expressions appeared on his face, making his face look particularly ferocious. Ron smiled. Of course. Why else do you think I would appear here? No. That's impossible. You are a human, a lowly human. How can a lowly creature like a human reach this level? Impossible. Klein screamed like a madman. He simply couldn't accept this reality. A few months ago, Ron's strength was inferior to his. But now, not only had he surpassed him, but he had also left him far behind. How could the proud and arrogant Klein accept this? Great Elder Ron, he really became a deity. Looking at the calm Ron in the sky, Kadena asked in surprise and doubt. Hamelin hesitated. Perhaps, I'm not too sure. Apart from the Lich King, I haven't seen any other deities. Behind Kadena, Saya gently pulled on the corner of his sister's clothes and asked in a low voice, Sister, what's a deity? Can it be eaten? Isis rolled her eyes at him. You don't believe me? At this time Ron smiled. He slowly lowered his hands and suddenly clenched them. Then, his whole body began to twitch, pung, pung, pung. In an instant, a black fog erupted from Ron's body. This strange black fog filled the surrounding space and formed a powerful barrier. In the black fog, countless gray phantoms danced in the wind. Those ferocious skulls were the terrifying undead. These undead let out mournful cries, which were particularly strange in the dark night sky. Divine power of death. Eutarus's expression changed. He clearly felt the vast and strange power on Ron's body dominated the law of death. It was constantly eroding this space, as if it was showing off its territory. Even Eutarus put away his relaxed expression. This was no longer as simple as a deity crushing an ant, but a battle between two deities. Eutarus's expression was very grave. Eutarus quietly looked at Ron's face. Ron's face seemed to have turned into a ferocious skull mask and overlapped with that person's appearance. It was a figure that Eutarus was very familiar with and in awe of. He used the divine power of death, and was a hero who made the entire main plane tremble in fear. Divine power of death. Hermes. Eutarus's whole body tensed up like a leopard choosing a person to devour. At this time, he growled. Roar. A huge figure revealed its true form in the sky above Pompeii city. Its huge body shrouded the sky, and its 6 huge wings covered the entire city like an umbrella. Its terrifying power filled the heavens and earth, causing all creatures to tremble. Eutarus had transformed into his true form. The huge sky dragon kept roaring in the sky, and a great battle was about to break out. You're here, very good. His hands gradually clenched, and Ron's face drew a strange smile. The green soul fire burned in his eyes, and the angry undead let out a terrifying roar. This was not an ordinary battle, but a showdown between two deities. Their bet was the continent of Noah. The winner would win everything. The loser would lose everything. Death's hand. The strange hand formed by the black fog suddenly stretched out. At this moment, Ron took the initiative to attack. Powerful, terrifying, and strange divine power of death erupted, as if a demon from hell had stretched out a huge claw, spatial blade. Compared to Ron, Sky Dragon Eutarus had no reason to retreat. He was a super-divine beast that had been famous for a long time. How could he bow his head to a human who had just become a god? Countless spatial blades spread out, forming a huge long blade. The long blade was so powerful that even the world shook. Not good. Be careful. In an instant, Kay screamed crazily. She clearly felt how powerful the aftermath of the collision of the two terrifying forces was. Just as she was at her wit's end, Hamelin made a timely move. Bone wall. In the blink of an eye, a solid bone wall formed from countless bones rose from the ground, enveloping everyone within. Boom, Death Godforce and Space Godforce collided, and a powerful shockwave spread out. Countless spatial blades swept out in all directions, carrying with them a black corrosive energy. Everywhere they went, there was a zzz sound. Houses, trees, everything was turned to ashes by this terrifying corrosive energy. Crash. La. As if after a storm, the whole of Pompeii city was in a mess, and the sound of gravel sliding could be heard everywhere. Phew! Everyone breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Hamelin gratefully. Thank you. Great Elder. No need to thank me. As soon as Hamelin said this, he was stunned. He saw that half of Pompeii City had been turned into ruins. Even the wall of bones that he had summoned had become thousands of years old. It was like a dilapidated house that was on the verge of collapse. Chapter 834. Ha ha ha. At this time, Eutaris, who had been cautious all this time, suddenly burst into laughter. I was almost fooled by you, kid. You're not a god at all, you're just bluffing. Hearing Eutaris's words, Ron was startled at first, but then he smiled disapprovingly. Eutaris, are you out of your mind? I control the laws and can freely use the divine power of death. How is that not a god? Ron paused, and his eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. The current me is unprecedentedly powerful. Whether I'm a god or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is that I can defeat you. Eutaris, if you want to use words to break my confidence, then you've got the wrong idea. When Eutaris said this, not to mention the people of the Scourge Church, even Klein did not believe it. The current Ron, even if he could not defeat Eutaris, was strong enough to compete with him. As Ron said, Eutaris only wanted to break Ron's fighting spirit. It was not that Ron did not know Eutaris's strength. If he was not sure, he would not have come to Noah Continent to die. Ha ha. Eutaris laughed, shook his head, and said, Ron, do you think I'm lying to you? I'm a dignified sky dragon, there's no need for me to do such a thing. That's right, you do control the laws of death, and can freely use the divine power of death. However, if you want to become a true god, you still lack one thing. Godhood. That's godhood. Eutaris smiled faintly and said slowly, Don't worry. The laws are only one kind of divine power. As long as you simplify the divine power and condense it into godhood, you will be a true god. Ron's heart skipped a beat and he was bewildered. Could it be that what he said was true? Although he had doubts in his heart, Ron did not show it on his face. He only snorted coldly. It doesn't matter whether I'm a god or not. It doesn't matter whether I have godhood or not. What matters is that my strength is enough to defeat you. That's enough. You are wrong again. Eutaris smiled sinisterly. The difference in strength between the two is too great. With a godhead, that's a true god. Without a godhead, that's just a divine realm expert who can use the power of laws. Many divine realm experts are stuck at this step, unable to break through for the rest of their lives. Although you don't have a godhead yet, your strength is infinitely close to that of a god. One day, you will condense a godhead and become a true god. Eutalis faintly smiled as killing intent appeared in his eyes. But I won't let you see that day. Now, I'll show you the power of a true god with a divine spark. Eutaris truly wanted to kill Ron. Ron was simply too young. As long as he had enough time, he could even become another Lich King, standing at the peak and looking down on all living things. Eutaris wouldn't let this happen. The current Ron had to die. Following Eutaris's low roar, an enormous pressure of divine power swept towards Ron. This time, he did not hold back, and his first move was a real killing blow. Shatter space. A huge black sphere trapped Ron, and then space began to collapse. Countless fragments flew out and turned into a myriad of blades that attacked Ron. In Ron's eyes, it was as if the entire world was being torn apart. This was the space created by Eutaris. Within this space, Eutaris controlled the laws and became an invincible existence. This was his domain, the domain of divinity. Come! Ron's eyes blazed with fighting intent. Since this is the case, let the battle become even fiercer. Death space. At this time, Ron made his move. He opened the 7th chapter of the Book of Death, the death space, and terrifying death divine energy continuously gushed out. The two divine energies collided and burst out with a dazzling brilliance, igniting even the sky. At this moment, Ron's body was surrounded by countless specters, and his eyes had turned into a faint green color. A huge skull phantom appeared in the air, looking extremely strange. At this time, Ron's heart shook and his eyes filled with alarm. How could this be? Space divine energy and death divine energy collided, and the latter immediately collapsed. Eutarus's power easily destroyed Ron's domain of death. Not good. Ron immediately had a bad feeling. He did his utmost to stimulate his death divine energy, intending to contend against Eutarus. Unfortunately, his power was too weak. They were both using divine energy, but Ron's death divine energy and Eutarus's space divine energy were like a child competing with an adult. Boundless divine power of space surged forth like a tidal wave, instantly devouring all of Ron's divine power of death. At this time, Ron heard Eutarus's thunderous voice. Ron, look carefully, this is a godhead, the formidable power of a true god. Impossible! Impossible! Ron's heart was dripping blood. He had already become a god, but he didn't expect this to be the result of his battle with Eutarus. Rumble, as if the world was spinning, Ron's mind went blank. Through Eutarus's sea of consciousness, he saw a black ball-like thing that was constantly rotating and emitting a huge amount of space divine energy. Godhead. This is a godhead. Ron was greatly shaken. He finally realized that Eutarus wasn't lying. Every god had their own godhead that protected their soul. Although the godhead was small, its defensive power was very strong. No matter how hard Ron tried, he couldn't penetrate it and attack Eutarus's soul. Eutarus was naturally aware of Ron's little trick. He faintly smiled and said, "Kid, you want to attack my soul? Ha ha ha, give up, you won't have the chance." So, I'm not a god. I was too naive. A self-deprecating look flashed in Ron's eyes. He knew that he was finished. Ron is finished. Standing in the rubble, Hamelin couldn't bear to look anymore. He closed his eyes in pain, and turbid tears slowly flowed down his cheeks. At this point in the battle, there was no suspense about the outcome. A realm of the gods' powerhouse, who only controlled the power of laws, was simply no match for a god. Ron was defeated. Countless fragments burst out from the shattered space and constantly cut Ron's body. In just an instant, Ron's fragile body endured hundreds of millions of attacks. Shattered space. This was a divine skill used to deal with Noah. Eutarus used it on Ron. Ron's strength was inferior to Noah's, so his defeat was already destined. How could this be? Ron looked at his hand in disbelief, only to see his hand turn into a cloud of smoke and disappear. He could feel his body constantly melting and turning into dust. Chapter 835. Ron, it's over. Hamelin couldn't bear to watch anymore. He closed his eyes in pain, and muddy tears slowly flowed down his cheeks. Ron! Sorrowful cries and the heart-wrenching cries of the women came from the night sky. At this point in the battle, there was no suspense about the outcome of the battle. An expert from the domain of the gods, who had only mastered the power of rules, was no match for a god. Billions of fragments burst out from the shattered space, and these fragments constantly cut Ron's body. In just a moment, Ron's fragile body suffered countless attacks. How could this be? Ron looked at his body in disbelief. He could feel his body constantly melting, turning into dust, and slowly disappearing. Am I going to die? Asterisk is not equal to small asterisk say, I really don't want to. Godhood. What is godhood? I have already mastered the power of rules, so why can't I have it? Ron's heart was full of confusion, unwillingness, and grief, but now he was powerless. Mentor Hamelin, I failed to live up to your teachings. Kadena, Aurora, D-Lin, Basara, Isis, and the children I haven't met yet. I'm sorry. I've done my best. After saying this, Ron's eyes dimmed and he lost consciousness. Ron was dead. Eutarus had killed his body and destroyed his soul. The battle between a god and an expert from the domain of the gods had finally come to an end. Ron's soul drifted unconsciously with the wind. He could see the broken walls of Pompeii City, the dazed Mentor Hamelin, the furious Kay, and the grief-stricken Cadina, Becerra, and the others. He also saw the small figure of Saya in the crowd. This little boy, only 7 or 8 years old, clenched his fists tightly, and his eyes shot out the anger of revenge. He also saw the ferocious soldiers of the Red Silk Army surround these people and put them back into the dungeon under the command of Klein. However, Ron was powerless against all of this. His body had already shattered, and his soul had dispersed. Everything in front of him was getting further and further away. He wanted to shout, he wanted to scream, but he realized that he couldn't make a single sound. His body was involuntarily flying upwards, drifting further and further away. It was located in the southern forest of the Noah continent. Towering trees covered the sky, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of leaves. No one knew how long it had been since someone came here. A small path could be vaguely seen, and in this remote primitive forest, a house made of stone stood out. The exterior of the house looked like a church, but it wasn't. The tall spire, the semicircular arches, and the windows that had long lost their edges gave off a gloomy atmosphere. This building had been around for a long time, and the mottled exterior walls were already covered in moss. In this small house, an old woman wearing a silver-gray robe and a face full of wrinkles, like a savage, sat upright. Her stooped figure was slightly trembling in the small house. The old woman raised her head, her turbid eyes filled with hope, as if she was waiting for something. At this time, the oil lamp in the corner of the room suddenly burst into flames without warning. The silver-gray old woman was startled. When she turned her head and saw the faintly pulsing blue soul fire, she was first stunned, and then her eyes revealed a look of ecstasy. She immediately stood up and rushed over. Looking at the small thing that looked like an oil lamp, her lips trembled, and tears slowly flowed down her cheeks. "Ron, you're finally here." 3 hours after the battle ended, the sky was already bright. Eutaris received Klein in a ruined room in the Imperial Palace. "Father, your injuries have healed?" As soon as Klein entered the room, he immediately bowed. Eutaris softly grunted, but did not comment. At this time, he stared at Klein with a sharp gaze. "Klein, as my son, you really disappoint me." Klein was startled and immediately knelt down. "I'm sorry, Father. Your son wasn't able to defeat Ron and caused you trouble." "It's not about that." Eutaris angrily waved his hand. "I asked you, how is the matter of the key?" "Ah." Klein raised his head in astonishment, not daring to look at Eutaris's angry gaze. "I haven't found Mary yet." "Who wants you to find Mary?" "I want the key to the lost continent." Eutaris roared angrily, his tone unprecedentedly harsh. "I don't ask you about the process, I only want the result." "The result, do you know?" Eutaris angrily slapped the table, causing the cups on the table to jump. Klein jumped in fright. Cold sweat trickled down his back with a swoosh sound. "I know. Father, I'll go look for it, right away." Klein immediately retreated. He wanted to find the key to the lost continent. He had to find it immediately. If he couldn't find it, Eutaris wouldn't spare him. 3 days. When Klein retreated to the door, Eutaris's cold and emotionless voice came from behind him. "Klein, if you can't find the key within 3 days, you don't have to come back. Disappear with Ron." Upon hearing this, Klein staggered and nearly fell. His eyes revealed a look of resentment. After all, he had personally rescued Eutaris from Bartolo's prison. Now that he was no longer of any use to him, he had been kicked away. Thinking of this, Klein's heart was filled with sorrow. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have been so busy. Not only had he betrayed his faith, but he had also almost lost his life. Although he was strangely angry, Klein did not show it on his face. He turned slightly and bowed deeply, his face full of humility. "Yes, Father, I will definitely find the key. I won't let you down." With that, he turned and left. "Damn undead." After Klein left, Eutaris looked at his back and snorted coldly. It wasn't that he didn't see the flash of resentment on Klein's face, but for a high and mighty god like him, there was no need to care. What Eutaris cared about was whether this Klein was still useful to him. If not, then there was no use in keeping this guy. If he can't find the key. Eutaris snorted coldly and muttered to himself, the killing intent in his eyes growing stronger. After an unknown period of time, Ron faintly opened his eyes. Reflected in his eyes was the face of an old woman covered in wrinkles. The old woman looked at him quietly, her expression full of concern. "You're awake." Ron was startled and got up with a roll. Only then did he realize that he was lying on a bed with a thin quilt covering his body. Ron took a few deep breaths before coming back to his senses. He looked at the old woman gratefully. "Did you save me?" The old woman smiled and did not answer Ron's question. Ron shook his dizzy head. At this time, he saw that the old woman's face was somewhat familiar. A thought flashed through his mind, and he blurted out a sentence. Chapter 836. Mary. Klein had searched the entire Noah continent for Mary, and now she was standing in front of Ron, alive and well. What made him even more puzzled was that he had clearly been killed by Eutaris, yet he had inexplicably come back to life, and appeared in a small house in the forest south of the Noah continent. Thank you. In any case, one thing was clear. This woman named Mary had saved him. Ron got out of bed and sincerely thanked Mary. "No need to thank me." Mary smiled and waved her hand. "The one who saved you wasn't me, but Lord Noah." "Lord Noah?" Ron raised his head, his eyes filled with astonishment. "You mean, Lord Noah saved me? He's not dead yet?" When Noah died, Ron, who was far away in Bartlow's prison, also sensed it. Although he did not know the details, Noah's aura had disappeared. Did he come back to life like me? Thinking of this, Ron was both surprised and delighted. If Lord Noah was not dead, then the Noah continent could be saved. Although Eutaris was a god, Lord Noah was also a god. Lord Noah is dead. As if she had seen through Ron's thoughts, Mary shook her head and replied with an extremely pained expression on her face. Even if Lord Noah is still alive, he can't fight against Eutaris. Eutaris is too powerful, and Lord Noah was killed by him. Ah! Ron's entire body trembled, and his face turned deathly pale with a whoosh sound. His mouth was filled with bitterness. "So that's how it is," I thought. The two sighed in unison and looked gloomy. At this time, Ron slowly sorted out some of his thoughts and frowned. "Lord Noah is already dead, so how did he save me? And why are you here?" Mary smiled. "Do you still remember that cross of rebirth?" "Cross of rebirth?" Ron shuddered violently. It was as if a box of memories had been opened, and he recalled the past scene after scene. "Ron, if you really have the money, then buy this." Homelin pointed at the cross of rebirth and said to Ron, "I want it." Ron said to Mary, "Are you sure? You don't want the holy relic anymore?" Mary chuckled. "No. So it was it that saved me," Ron murmured. He reached out his hand to touch his neck, but found nothing. The cross of rebirth that he had been wearing around his neck had long since disappeared. The cross of rebirth can give you a second life, provided that the damage to your body doesn't exceed 80%. However, you're a necromancer, so this shouldn't be a problem. However, you can only use it once. After using it, the cross of rebirth will disappear forever. Mary smiled, but there was a hint of disappointment in her eyes. This was originally something that belonged to Lord Noah. He didn't need it himself, so he gave it to me. In the end, you bought it. Perhaps this is fate. Ron's eyes became slightly moist as he listened. If Lord Noah had this thing on him back then, perhaps he wouldn't have died, or even come back to life. Mary was right. It was indeed Lord Noah who saved me, or rather, he sacrificed his own life to give me a chance to come back to life. Mary gently wiped the corners of her eyes. Sigh. Ron, you don't have to blame yourself. Even if Lord Noah had the cross of rebirth and obtained a second life, he still wouldn't have been a match for Utilities. Perhaps, Lord Noah leaving the cross of rebirth to you would have been a better choice. A better choice? Ron carefully chewed on these words. He felt that Mary's words had another meaning. At this moment, he suddenly trembled. What? You mean, I can defeat Utilities? Yes. Mary nodded, her tone resolute and unquestionable. Ron didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Miss Mary, are you sure you're not joking with me? Ron, who had fought with Utilities before, undoubtedly knew how terrifying Utali's strength was. It could even be said that besides the dead Noah, no one in the entire continent understood how terrifying Utilities was better than Ron. Ron, who had already comprehended the law of death and was familiar with controlling the divine power of death, had been defeated in an instant. The terrifying power that had appeared in Utalis's mind and protected his soul was still fresh in his memory. Now that he heard that even Lord Noah wasn't a match for Utilities, how could he? I'm not joking. Even Lord Noah thinks that you can do it, so he left the cross of rebirth to you. Mary earnestly said, more importantly, you are the appointed successor of the Lich King, Hermes. As long as the undead don't die, the calamities don't die. This edict that has been passed down for 100,000 years should be with you. As Mary spoke, she slowly closed her eyes. The room returned to silence, and only the light breathing of the two could be heard. Ron's mouth was wide open, and he stood there like an idiot. He was dumbfounded, completely dumbfounded. His mind couldn't digest these things for a while. I am the appointed successor of the Lich King. The edict of the undead calamity should be with me? Ron stammered, his face paling even more. Of course, Mary said with a serious expression. Who would have thought that the ancient undead magic that had disappeared for 100,000 years would reappear in this world? An ordinary youth from the Noah continent would actually be able to grasp the undead magic that was popular in the previous continent, Omros? All of this, could it be the will of the heavens? Or is this the arrangement of fate? No. There's only one answer. The deceased Lich King, Hermes, is secretly protecting all of this, and you are his successor. Ron opened his mouth, but didn't say anything. It was an accident that he learned undead magic. If it wasn't for the ring that the deceased Grandpa Zari picked up and gave it to him, he wouldn't have met Homelin and wouldn't have learned undead magic. But afterwards, he trained undead magic step by step to the peak and rebuilt the Scourge Church, allowing undead magic to regain its former glory in the Omros continent. All of this wasn't something that he could explain. Could it be that the Lich King really is secretly protecting me, just because I'm his successor? Ron thought to himself. At this moment, the corner of Mary's mouth curved up slightly. Actually, the most important thing is that the rumored shattered primary plane that fell into the hands of the Lich King is in your hands. What? Ron was shocked. The shattered primary plane is in my hands? What does this mean? Hee, it's the ring in your hand. Mary laughed and pointed at the soul ring in Ron's hand. Don't look down on this little thing in your hand. Utaris did everything he could, even turning the entire Noah continent upside down to find me. His goal was to obtain this little thing. Although this ring is small, it seals a primary plane. It's the only gift that the Lich King, Hermes, left for his successor. I'm the successor? Ron slowly recovered from his shock and muttered. That's right, all the evidence points to you, Ron, being the successor of the Lich King, Hermes. Ron's breathing became hurried. He thought about it. When his soul entered the soul ring, it was as if he had returned home. He could even see the face of the Lich King, as well as his remaining consciousness. Chapter 837. Lord Noah. Trust me, Ron muttered as if he was talking to himself. Slowly, a trace of red appeared on his pale face, and the confusion in his eyes disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a face of confidence and calmness. Utaris is indeed very powerful. Ron's expression returned to normal as he admitted honestly, but since Lord Noah trusts me, I can definitely do it. Mary, tell me what to do. Looking at Ron's confident gaze, Mary smiled in satisfaction. Very good, Lord Lich King didn't misjudge you. Lord Noah also didn't misjudge you. Ron, please follow me. Ron nodded heavily and followed Mary into the room. At this moment, he was like a completely different person compared to before. The room was pitch black and nothing could be seen. Ron used the necromancy spell, Dark Spirit Vision, to see some things clearly in the darkness. This was a relatively large room, and it seemed that no one had cleaned it for a long time. The walls were covered with dust, and the ceiling was covered with cobwebs. There were also several palm-sized spiders crawling around. A lizard ran out from a corner, caught a spider, and swallowed it down with a smack sound. Mary calmly walked to the center of the room and gently blew away the dust on the table. She lifted a piece of cloth and revealed a white, translucent object. Ron focused his eyes and saw that the object covered by the cloth was actually a crystal ball. Mary placed both hands on the crystal ball and chanted an incantation. A trace of blue light shot out from the crystal ball and illuminated the entire room. Kacha! Kacha! The entire room seemed to come alive as it trembled slightly. An enormous power began to circulate and countless rays of light shot towards the crystal ball that Mary was in. OM, the dust falling from the ceiling covered Ron's face. The small animals had long since run off to who knows where. An enormous power gathered in the room. Ron no longer had the time to worry about whether or not this shabby room would collapse. He stared closely at Mary's actions with a nervous expression. Finally, the power reached a critical point and a circle of light with a diameter of 3 meters appeared. When this circle of light appeared, the crystal ball in Mary's hand suddenly exploded and the crystals scattered all over the floor. As the power within the crystal ball disappeared, the room became dim as if it had lost its life. Only the circle of light was left floating in the air and constantly rotating. What is this? Ron frowned and asked. It looks like a spatial tunnel. That's right, this is indeed a spatial tunnel. Mary smiled, but it's a one-time use. It's useless once it's opened. Ron took a deep breath. You mean, you want me to go in? Yes. Mary moved slightly to the side and opened up a path. Ron, go in. There's what you want, and the answer you've been searching for. The answer I've been looking for. A trace of passion suddenly appeared in Ron's eyes. He nodded slightly and slowly walked into the circle of light. Rumble. A loud sound was heard. Ron only felt his vision darken. The next moment, he found himself in another space. The circle of light disappeared and everything returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. Mary quietly sat down and muttered to herself, Lord Noah, I've completed the mission you gave me. Ron, it's up to you now. The Noah continent. I'll leave it to you. After calmly saying this, a strange smile appeared on Mary's face. At this moment, a cold light suddenly flashed in her hand. It was a sharp dagger. In an instant, that sharp dagger sank into Mary's abdomen. A trace of pain appeared on Mary's face and her eyes slowly dimmed. A trace of blood flowed down from the corner of her mouth as she spoke in a soft voice. Lord Noah, wait for me. In a room of a small house in the southern forest, an old human woman silently sat on the ground. A sharp dagger was deeply embedded in her abdomen. Her eyes were tightly shut, and although there was a trace of pain on her face, a satisfied smile hung on the corner of her mouth. Mary was dead. She was an orphan who had been taken in by Noah since she was young and had served him for her entire life. Ever since Noah died, her heart had also died. The only reason she was still alive was because of that unfinished mission. A fierce cold wind blew past Ron's ears. Snow covered everything as far as his eyes could see. It was a world of white and filled with a deathly stillness. The rapidly decreasing temperature caused even someone as strong as Ron to feel a bone-chilling chill. Where is this? Where am I? Ron stood there silently with a blank expression on his face. At this moment, he was standing in a boundless snowy plain with thick snow under his feet. Mary had let Ron enter this strange spatial passage, but she didn't tell him where to go. Perhaps even she didn't know. You have finally come. Just as Ron was at a loss, he heard a sigh, followed by a thunderous voice. Who is it? Who is there calling me? Ron was startled. With his strength, it was impossible for him to not notice an enemy approaching him. However, when he released his spiritual sense and looked around, he couldn't find a single person. No one? Impossible. I clearly heard a voice just now. Could it be an illusion? Ron became nervous and vigilantly looked around. He also tightly gripped the dragonbone staff in his hand, his palms sweating. However, the only response he got was the whistling of the cold wind. There was no movement. Could it be that I really misheard? Ron was bewildered. At this moment, that thunderous voice sounded again. Come here. This time, Ron heard it clearly. This wasn't a real voice, but it came from the soul. It was as if it was directly communicating with Ron's soul. This voice was very familiar to him. It had a commanding tone, and there was a hint of dignity in it. This voice. Where did he hear it before? Ron took a deep breath. He couldn't help but walk in the direction of the voice. In the boundless land of ice and snow, it was impossible to distinguish north from south. Ron didn't know why he was walking in that direction. It was as if there was something there that was attracting him. At this moment, through the wind and snow, he saw a ray of light not far away. The white light was especially dazzling in this land of ice and snow. It was like a bright lamp, guiding Ron in the direction he was going. It's over there. Perhaps it was a kind of intuition, but Ron knew that the voice in his mind was coming from that strange light. Strangely, in this land of ice and snow, Ron's power seemed to be suppressed. He couldn't fly and could only obediently walk forward step by step. His boots were already soaked in the snow and his feet were already numb from the cold. His thick black robe couldn't block the whistling cold wind. Time seemed to have stopped. The world was covered in a vast expanse of white. On this boundless land of ice and snow, there was only a black silhouette walking forward. Every step seemed incomparably difficult. Closer, closer, after an unknown amount of time, Ron finally arrived in the vicinity of that light. The source of the light was a huge ice mountain. He was already standing at the foot of that huge ice mountain. This ice mountain was conical in shape and was several hundred meters tall. At the peak of this ice mountain, a vague silhouette could be seen. You're finally here. A sigh sounded in Ron's mind. He raised his head and in an instant, it was as if he had been struck by lightning. His entire body trembled, and his face was full of excitement and respect. Lord Lich King. Although Ron had never seen the Lich King before, he could already recognize the other party at a glance. This mighty figure who had appeared in his dreams countless times was the Lich King. At that moment, the Lich King was wearing heavy armor that was airtight. He wore a skull mask on his face, and his chest, shoulders, knees, and other places were carved with skull ornaments. His tall and valiant body was sitting upright on a huge throne at the top of this ice mountain. He was like an emperor who ruled over the world as he looked disdainfully down at the earth beneath his feet. The person sitting upright on the throne had long lost all signs of life. Ling Ling was just a corpse, a belief, a symbol. However, his power and majesty had already enveloped every corner of the world. In front of him, even powerful gods seemed to pale in comparison. The Lich King had died, but his faith, his spirit, and his prestige had become a great legend that shook the world. Even though he had died, he was still full of dignity and was revered by tens of thousands of people. Even his enemies would tremble in fear. Chapter 838. Ron silently looked at the giant throne on top of the ice mountain. His heart was filled with incomparable respect and reverence. In front of this giant that looked down on the world, Ron felt that he was very small. 23 WX. Just like the Sky Dragon, the Lich King was also a true god. The Sky Dragon gave Ron the feeling of power and dominance, but the Lich King gave him the feeling of reverence and respect. This made Ron feel an inexplicable urge to kneel down and worship him. The eyes of the king on the ice mountain lit up and a trace of green light appeared. Immediately afterwards, a powerful divine sense swept towards Ron. Suddenly, Ron felt as if his entire body had been seen through. In front of this giant, he held nothing back. "Child, your strength isn't very strong, but considering your age, it's not bad." The Lich King on the frozen throne withdrew his gaze. A wave of soul energy was transmitted over, confirming Ron's strength. In reality, Ron was quite confident in his own strength. Apart from being unable to defeat the Sky Dragon, he was far stronger than other experts in the divine realm. After controlling the law of death, he thought that he had become a god, or at least infinitely close to becoming one. With this kind of strength, the Lich King could only give him a not bad evaluation. It was easy to imagine just how strong the Lich King was. Ron took a few deep breaths and calmed his excited heart. He gathered his courage and asked, "Lord Lich King, could it be that you're really dead?" The Lich King's eyes under the mask lit up. He asked back, "What do you think?" Ron didn't feel a trace of life from this giant. From his judgment as a necromancer, the Lich King was truly dead. What was left was just a remnant of his soul. It could even be said that it was just a remnant of his consciousness. This remnant of his consciousness wasn't the same as his soul. If the Lich King's soul still existed, the Sky Dragon wouldn't have been able to do as he pleased. Ron really wanted to say yes, but standing in front of this giant, he was a bit doubtful. Just this remnant of his soul was incomparably powerful, perhaps even stronger than the Sky Dragon. He couldn't say this and could only shake his head. "I don't know." "Ha." The Lich King laughed. "It's not that you don't know, it's just that you don't dare to say it." "Death. What is it?" As a necromancer, a researcher of the soul, it's impossible for you not to know. Death. Nothing is eternal, even if it's a god. Death. The Lich King of the Lich King's soul. Death. Death too? Ron's eyes widened. The words of this giant in front of him overturned everything he knew. He always thought that gods were immortal and had never heard that gods could die. But then again, wasn't Noah a god? He was killed by the Sky Dragon. What are gods? They're just living beings that control the power of the laws. No matter if it's humans, elves, or magical beasts. They're all living beings. Since they're living beings, even if they control the laws, who says that they can't die? Life or death. It's all a process. Child, you should understand this simple logic. The Lich King guided him patiently, as if he was his teacher. He opened the door to a higher level of the laws of death for him. Ron listened carefully and didn't miss a single word, even though he still didn't understand the concept of reincarnation and process. So, what does it matter if I'm alive or dead? No matter how strong a god is, no matter how strong an army is, it will still die in the end. The Lich King's tone was so calm that it didn't have a trace of emotion. As a remnant soul, his body had already died and his soul had been destroyed. The only reason he existed was to say those words to Ron. He had indeed waited for too long. It had already been 100,000 years. Ron's mouth moved. He wanted to say something, but in the end, he didn't say anything. The giant in front of him, who had single-handedly created the glory of the scourge, didn't need to be comforted. At this time, the Lich King's tone changed and became serious. However, even though I'm already dead, the scourge cannot be destroyed. Its existence is a symbol, a flag. It concerns the lives, dignity, and living space of billions of undead. As long as the undead don't die, the scourge will not be destroyed. The flag of the scourge will not fall because of my death. Ron, whether you're willing or not, you must take on this heavy responsibility. The scourge is the hope of all undead. The Lich King raised his voice. The scourge in the main plane had already been destroyed. At least, it only existed in name. The Lich King single-handedly created the glory of the scourge. However, he also knew that the scourge's prestige was built on the corpses of the undead and the bones of the undead. Killing, conquering, massacring cities, and destroying countries, the powerful scourge stepped into every corner of the main plane. All races and armies trembled under the blood-red skull war flag of the scourge. The glory of the past had resulted in the disaster of today. The Lich King was a wise man. His vision pierced through the fog and saw the unknown future. He had already predicted that the decline of the scourge would cause great turmoil in the main plane. It might even cause a reshuffle. When that time came, the undead would naturally be affected. He needed a successor, a new leader, to protect the undead in the main plane. This candidate was Ron. Ron cultivated necromancy and stood at the peak of the Noah continent. It only took him a short 10 years to unify the entire Noah continent. Without his secret support, it would not have been possible. His support was very simple and direct. He directly gave Ron power through the Soul Ring. It was only today that Ron realized that every time he was in danger, the Lich King's shadow was behind it. To a certain extent, his mentor, Homelin, was also a chess piece that the Lich King had planted. His responsibility was to guide Ron on the path of necromancy. The biting cold wind scraped Ron's face like knives. It was bone-chilling, but at this moment, his heart was warm. He slowly raised his head, his eyes shining with determination. Respected Lich King, Ron, am willing to take on this heavy responsibility. I solemnly swear on my life that the scourge will return to its former glory. Very good. The Lich King's eyes flickered under the cold steel mask, then dimmed. You walk up. Yes, my king. Ron bowed deeply, then lifted his feet and walked up the steps on the ice mountain. There were a total of 9,999 steps on the ice mountain, winding up the mountain. Ron carried deep respect as he walked up the ice mountain step by step. His steps were firm and powerful. The cold wind blew up his robes, making them flutter like a black dragon. At this moment, goose feather-like snow fluttered down, covering the earth with a layer of silver. After an unknown amount of time, Ron finally walked up the 9,999 steps and arrived in front of the Lich King's frozen throne. He lowered his head deeply. Very good. At this moment, the Lich King's eyes strangely lit up. Wear my mask and inherit my everything. Yes, my king. Ron bowed respectfully. He slowly walked up the last few steps of the throne and reached out his right hand. Kacha? Kacha! Strangely enough, Ron's hand only lightly touched the frozen throne, and the 10,000-year-old ice on the throne suddenly cracked open without any warning. The crack grew bigger and bigger. Immediately after, with a boom, the entire ice mountain shook as if it had exploded. The Lich King's body on the frozen throne cracked open, turning into thousands of ghosts. They wrapped around the ice mountain, and sharp wails shook the entire area. The Lich King broke free from the shackles of the decaying body and revealed a huge soul shadow. It quietly floated in the air and looked at Ron with a fatherly gaze. Child, I've always watched you as you grew up day by day into a powerful undead, a great hero. Child, I also believe that you've always been cautious in using your strength. However, true strength isn't just strength. I'm telling you this because I already have a premonition that my life is about to come to an end, and you will be crowned king. Ding, ding, ding. Following a clear sound, something that seemed to be made of gold rolled down from the throne and landed in front of Ron's feet. This was an exquisite skull mask with a sinister face. It opened its bloody mouth like a ghost. Ron quietly held it in his hand and felt the boundless power of death coming from the mask. Go, child. Noble undead, undying souls, the belief in death, the thirst for power, the loyalty to evil, the yearning to rule. Wear it and you will be my successor, their king. Ron bowed deeply. When he straightened up, his eyes revealed a trace of determination. He took a deep breath and slowly put the Lich King's mask on his head. Boom! An earth-shattering sound rang out. In an instant the entire world shook. Large chunks of ice fell like raindrops. The powerful divine power of death swept up the ice and snow and threw it into the air. Clouds and mist filled the sky. A pillar of light descended from the sky, entangling countless souls. They were screaming. Ron's entire body trembled. He felt the power coming from the Lich King's mask become stronger and stronger. It filled his entire consciousness. The soul in his consciousness let out a howl. He didn't know whether it was out of excitement or agitation. In the crevice of the iceberg, a small green insect was twisting its small body in pain. Suddenly, a crack appeared on its back, and a pair of beautiful colorful wings quietly stretched out from the broken shell. In his sea of consciousness, a black ball slowly formed. It was a layer of protective membrane that surrounded his soul and became one with it. At this moment, Ron already knew that this thing was called Divine Deity. Ron, who possessed the divine spark of death, released its power without any hesitation. The earth cracked, the sky collapsed, and the vast world of ice and snow was like the end of the world. Boom! Boom! After an unknown amount of time, the world of ice and snow finally calmed down. Ron quietly stood in front of the frozen throne with his eyes closed. He wore the sinister and strange Lich King's mask on his face. His body was wrapped in a layer of black gas. This layer of black gas was formed by countless souls. The Lich King's soul shadow had already disappeared. He had put down the mission that he had carried on his back for 100,000 years and completely disappeared from the world. In front of the bone-chilling frozen throne, a new king stood. He was like a rising sun, shining with the luster of life. Whoosh! Without any warning, a pair of blood-red eyes opened under the terrifying mask. In an instant they exploded with light. Chapter 839. The huge city square was filled with black heads. These people surrounded the center of the square, pointing at the people in the square. Among these people, there was the great elder of the Scourge Church, the divine necromancer Hamelin, the dark dragon R.A. Firth, the elven high priestess Undine, the fairy dragon Frigga, the Beaumont behemoth Hauchin and his grandson, the golden Beaumont behemoth Kay, as well as a large number of powerhouses from the divine realm and the sacred domain. These powerhouses, who were usually rarely seen, had their powers sealed. Their hands and feet were tied with ropes made of special materials. They stood on a tall gallows, and 2 soldiers of the Red Silk Army were watching them. Among these people, they were all powerhouses of the Noah continent. Because they were unwilling to surrender to Utaris, they were going to be executed today. Some of them were from the Scourge Church, while others were from the Dragons, Beaumont clan, and Elves. Even though they knew they were going to die, these people were calm, and there was no fear in their eyes. There were hundreds of thousands of soldiers of the Red Silk Army guarding the periphery of the city. They were fully armed, with red silk tied to their arms. However, there were dozens of divine realm magical beasts among them, vigilantly scanning the surroundings. On the throne of the high platform in the center of the city sat an elegant middle-aged man in a gray robe. He narrowed his eyes and quietly scanned the people below. They are all powerhouses from the divine realm, and there are many powerhouses from the sacred domain. They are so powerful, but they are going to be executed today. What a pity! Sympathy appeared in the eyes of the onlookers, but in front of the ferocious Red Silk Army soldiers, they could only whisper to each other. A beautiful 17 or 18-year-old girl squeezed into the crowd. She was a thief and wore tight black clothes. Her blonde hair was tied behind her head, and she wore a pair of delicate leather boots. Her lively eyes carefully sized up the crowd of executioners. Beside her stood a white-haired old man. Looking at his attire, he was also a thief. However, he was more low-key. Not only did he wear a mask, he also pulled down the hood of his cloak, revealing only his eyes. "Grandfather, they're all from the Scourge Church?" the young thief girl asked the old thief beside her in a low voice. She couldn't help but look away. Not only the people of the Scourge Church, but also the dragons, the elves, and the Beaumont clan. They refused to surrender, so they were hanged by Utaris. The old thief nodded lightly. He clenched his fists tightly and his eyes were filled with anger. However, he soon relaxed and sighed silently. "It's too abominable. Because they refused to surrender, they are going to be hanged. There are so many people in the Noah continent who refused to surrender to Utaris." "Are they all going to be hanged?" The young thief girl was somewhat angry. She forgot her grandfather's instructions and raised her voice. The old thief was shocked and immediately made a gesture to keep quiet. "Quiet? Do you want to die? There are people from the Red Silk Army here. If they report you, you will lose your life." The young thief girl came to her senses and looked around with a guilty conscience. Seeing that no one was paying attention to her, she relaxed and playfully stuck out her tongue. "If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have brought you here. You troublemaker." The old thief sighed in relief and scolded softly, but his tone was full of doting. "I knew grandfather was the best to me." The young thief girl affectionately held onto her grandfather's arm and said with a smile. The old thief could not do anything about it. He could only roll his eyes and sigh helplessly. This old thief was none other than the dean of the Hans Academy, the one with the title of King of Assassins, Hill. The young thief girl was his granddaughter, Lynn. Hill was no longer the dean of the Hans Academy. Unlike Platz, he had disbanded the academy before the Red Silk Army's attack and brought his family to escape from Balavax to live in seclusion in a secluded place. After that, the entire continent was in chaos. As a powerhouse of the sacred domain, he did not attract too much attention, so he had been living peacefully until now. Only now did he secretly come out with his granddaughter, Lynn. They are really too pitiful. There is even a child who is not even 10 years old. Grandfather, can we save him? Lyn's eyes were brimming with tears as she shook Hill's hand. How? Hill laughed bitterly. Not to mention the divine beast Utaris, there are dozens of powerhouses of the divine realm watching us. If I did not hide my strength, I would have been discovered by them. Save them? Impossible. Even Ron was defeated by them. Lyn's eyes widened, her face full of disbelief. Isn't he the strongest powerhouse of the Noah continent? Even he was defeated? The strongest powerhouses of the Noah continent are only powerhouses of the divine realm. Utaris, on the other hand, is a true god from another plane. Hill's expression was somewhat dejected. Perhaps Platz's choice was right. The Noah continent has turned a new page. It is no longer the era we are familiar with. This time, all the powerhouses of the divine realm were hanged. It was the dawn of a new era, comparable to the birth of the Noah continent. This was the era of Utaris, the era of the Red Silk Army. At this time, Lynn softly exclaimed, "Grandfather, isn't that Klein? He is one of Utaris' subordinate. How could he be tied up and hanged?" "What? Impossible!" Hill was shocked. He focused his eyes and saw Klein on one of the high platforms. He was tied together with the people of the Calamity Church. It seemed that he was about to be hanged as well. Even in seclusion, the organization secretly cultivated by the King of Assassins did not stop operating. Every movement of the entire Noah continent could not escape his grasp. It was just that he did not have the ability to change it. It really is Klein. Utaris wants to execute him. It seems that he offended Utaris. I just don't know what happened. Hill shook his head. A secret of this level was not something that a powerhouse of the sacred domain like him could inquire about. Utaris sat in his seat, his calm face full of dignity. His gaze fell on the tied-up Klein, and a trace of disgust flashed in his eyes. Useless thing, it's better if he dies. Needless to say, the order to execute Klein came from Utaris. The reason was very simple: he could not find the key. To Utaris, nothing was important except for the key. Of course, there was a more important reason why he wanted to kill Klein, and that was that Klein had personally rescued him from Bartlow's prison after being imprisoned for 100,000 years. The proud and arrogant Utaris not only did not feel grateful, but instead felt that it was a disgrace. Naturally, the fewer people who knew about this, the better. Therefore, he found an excuse to deal with Klein. At this moment, in addition to being tied up like a rice dumpling, Klein's mouth was stuffed with a rag, making him unable to speak. The smart Klein naturally understood Utaris' intentions. He glared at him as if he wanted to spit fire. At this moment, he finally understood that even if he found the key, his fate would be the same. At this moment, his heart was filled with regret. Why did he lose his mind and release Utaris, this beast? The iron-armored ape Apps stood beside Utaris. After Klein was captured, he replaced Klein's position. He looked at the master in front of him, whom he had followed for a long time, and his heart felt like it was being stabbed by a knife. He knelt down with a thud. Lord Utaris, although Master can't find the key you mentioned, he's already done his best. Please give him a chance. Apps, you don't have to say any more. Utaris waved his hand and pretended to be magnanimous. The army has its rules. If we can't complete the mission and report, then we don't have to do anything. This brat is holding me up. He deserves to die. After saying the word deserve to die, a murderous intent flashed in Utaris' eyes. App's face turned pale. But Master once saved my lord. What did you say? Utaris' face turned cold. He turned around and looked at Apps coldly. He slowly stood up and walked closer to Apps step by step. He asked in a deep voice, "Even you want to betray me, is that it?" "Ah no, my lord," Apps panicked. He waved his hand desperately, but what greeted him was Utaris' fist. With a thud, App's head exploded like a watermelon. His body fell limply and stopped moving. Apps! Klein, who had been staring at Utaris, naturally saw this scene. His eyes were about to pop out of their sockets, but he couldn't shout anything. He could only struggle with all his might. Woo-woo. He couldn't speak. At this moment, Utaris' cold gaze shot towards him. With a boom, Klein's mind went blank. Then, he felt a large amount of flames coming out of his body. He wants to do it himself? By the time Klein realized this, it was already too late. At that moment, he had already turned into a flaming man. He couldn't even make a sound. Amidst the raging flames, Klein was filled with indignation, hatred, and regret. His entire being, including his body and soul, was reduced to ashes. Hiss! Everyone in the square sucked in a breath of cold air. They looked at Utaris with eyes full of fear, including the people of the Red Silk Army. Although these people knew that Utaris was powerful, they were not familiar with him. Besides fear, there was nothing else in their eyes. The members of the Red Silk Army lowered their heads, not daring to look at Utaris' murderous gaze. Utaris smiled. His strong methods had finally taken effect. These people were not the brothers of the Red Silk Army from 100,000 years ago. Only by using ruthless methods could they be intimidated. Execute. At this moment Utaris sneered. Yes, my lord. The executioners trembled. They untied the rope on the gallows and tied it over the criminal's head. Saya, are you afraid? Isis asked in a trembling voice. The two children were placed on the gallows, which attracted many sympathetic gazes. Many people knew that they were Ron's children. I'm not afraid. Saya proudly puffed out her small chest. Her childish expression had a trace of determination, which made people feel even more heartache. I don't want to watch. Lin gritted her teeth and lowered her head. Her beautiful big eyes were full of tears. Boom! At this time, the calm sky seemed to have been torn apart. Next, countless black dots fell from the sky like raindrops. These black spots turned into countless undead creatures. Terror knights, abominations, zombies, skeleton kings, gargoyles, and a large number of undead creatures. As soon as these undead creatures fell to the ground, they kept roaring, and their momentum shook the whole city. Undead! It's the undead! Run! The onlookers panicked and scattered. Even the Red Silk Army couldn't control the chaotic crowd. It's Ron. I feel his breath. Merlin shouted in surprise. His hands were tied behind his back, and he stood up in a daze. Ron. When the people of the Scourge Church heard this, they were surprised and happy. Several women had already sobbed in a low voice. It's Dad. It's really Dad. Dad has come to save us. Isis shouted excitedly. Saya's small eyes were full of hope. Is it that Ron? Isn't he dead? Did he come back to life? Eudalyce sneered. Even if he came back to life, so what? He could kill him again. How could the gap between a god and a god be made up in a few days? Eudalyce! A voice came from the sky. His voice was majestic and confident. It spread far and wide. Your death has come. A familiar figure appeared in the space passage in the sky. It was Ron. He stood in the sky and slowly descended. Different from before, Ron's face was wearing a terrifying skull mask. Eudalyce, who didn't think much of it, couldn't help but narrow his eyes when he saw Ron's mask. Lich King. Chapter 840. No. He's not the Lich King, he's Ron. Feeling the familiar soul wave, Eudalyce's wildly beating heart quickly calmed down. If it really was the Lich King, he would have no choice but to escape. This guy, he actually condensed a divine spark? Looking at Ron in the sky, Eudalyce's heart was filled with jealousy and hatred. Damn it, what happened to him in the past few days? Could it be that he obtained the Lich King's inheritance? Eudalyce's eyes widened, and such a thought involuntarily flashed through his mind. Yes, it must be. They are both undead, and the Lich King's divine spark of death is very compatible with Ron. That means the key to the lost world is in Ron's hands? Thinking of this, Eudalyce was not shocked, but rather happy and laughed loudly. God! Ron actually became a god. That's great. We're saved. Frigga's eyes were filled with tears of joy. However, Homelin was even more excited. After 100,000 years, he was finally able to see his mentor, the Lich King, again. This ferocious and terrifying skull mask was too familiar, and Homelin could not help but cry. The undead army that descended from the sky was not idle either. They madly rushed towards the soldiers of the Red Silk Army, and some even fought with the divine magical beast. The entire city was in chaos. Ron, who had fused with the divine spark of death, was many times stronger than before. The undead creatures he summoned were also much stronger. The soldiers of the Red Silk Army were no match for him, and they all retreated. The entire city was in chaos. Soon, the divine magical beasts of the Red Silk Army were either dead or running away. Those who did not have the strength of a divine realm had long since run away. The temporary gallows that had been erected also collapsed, and everyone was rescued. In an inconspicuous corner in the northwest of the city, two black figures slowly appeared. They were the King of Assassins, Hill, and his granddaughter Lin. When the battle was about to begin, Hill had already dragged Lin to the side to avoid being affected. Lin said in shock, "Grandpa, is that Ron? Didn't you say that he was already dead?" "He is indeed Ron." Hill hesitated for a moment. According to reliable information, Ron was killed by the Sky Dragon long ago. As for why he came back to life, I don't know. Lin muttered, he seems to be even stronger than before. Maybe. At their level of strength, we can't tell who's strong and who's weak, Hill said with a sigh. The situation was one-sided. Soon, the entire city was occupied by the undead army, leaving only the small place where Utaris stood. It was surrounded by countless undead. In the sky, hundreds of frost dragons were roaring, and on the ground, the undead army was densely packed. These undead unanimously targeted Utaris, waiting for Ron to give the order to attack. However, Utaris stood there unruffled and sneered. Looking at the other party's greedy and slightly disdainful smile, Ron felt uncomfortable and said coldly, "What are you laughing at?" "I'm laughing at you for overestimating yourself," Utaris said with a smile. "By the way, I have to thank you for bringing me something I've always been looking for but couldn't find. By the way, the key to the lost continent in Hermes' hands is with you, right?" "It's with me." Ron nodded, rarely admitting it. "Thank you for your honesty. You taking the initiative to admit it saved me a lot of effort." Utaris laughed, and his face suddenly became incomparably ferocious. "Ron, I admit that you are very powerful. At such a young age, you actually cultivated to the strength of the realm of gods, and you also obtained that guy's inheritance and fused with the godhood. However, if you think that you can defeat me with just this, then you are gravely mistaken. I, Utaris, already had the godhood 100,000 years ago. Compared to me, you are still too far away. That key handed over." With that, Utaris roared and suddenly transformed into a huge sky dragon true body, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, ferocious and terrifying. Spatial fall. As soon as Utaris attacked, he used his most powerful skill. In the space formed by his divine power, countless spatial spheres appeared out of thin air and bombarded Ron. For a moment, the earth quaked and the mountains swayed. An extremely vacuum formed around Utaris, and no living creatures were allowed to exist in this area. Ron. As soon as Utaris attacked, it was earth-shattering. For a moment, everyone's hearts were in their throats, and they couldn't help but shout. Ron couldn't lose. He also understood that he couldn't lose. Too many people's hopes were concentrated on him. The survival of the Scourge Church, the hopes of his family, the lives of his brothers, and the mission entrusted to him by the Lich King. There were too many factors, and he couldn't lose. Once he lost, there would be no hope of reprieve. "I won't lose because I am." Ron took a deep breath and calmed down. His mind was clear, and the death godhood above his sea of consciousness that wrapped around his soul began to frantically revolve. Then, his eyes opened and they shone brightly. Lich King! Death withering! As soon as Ron attacked, he used the famous ultimate skill of Lich King Hermes. Countless black auras immediately surged between heaven and earth. These black auras with strong corrosiveness crazily condensed and wrapped around Utaris with him as the center. Boom! This was the collision of the two divine forces. Thousands of rays of light erupted, and the city beneath Utaris's feet was instantly reduced to ruins. The force produced by the collision of the two divine forces continued to spread outwards, and the people who were still alive fled in all directions without regard for their lives. "Get down!" Saya and Isis ran a bit slower. Saya was sharp-eyed and nimble, and he immediately pushed his sister down and pressed her under his body. Soon, powerful divine powers engulfed them. "Saya!" Kadena cried out heartbreakingly, but Homelin pulled her away and desperately fled. "There's no time, let's go." Saya lay in a deep pit and desperately raised the power of the halo to resist. He only felt a piercing pain and soon lost consciousness. The confrontation between the divine powers of death and divine powers of space continued, and both sides used their strongest power. Ron's 6 huge wings spread out and his hair stood up. Ron's hair spread out and fluttered in the air. Wearing the Lich King's mask, He looked ferocious like a god of war. This guy's power has actually become so much stronger? Utaras gnashed his teeth as he thought, and his blood-red eyes stared at Ron. Utaras didn't know if it was an illusion, but he saw a huge shadow appear behind Ron. This shadow was wearing heavy undead armor and didn't wear a mask, revealing a skeleton-like face that was coldly staring at him. Woo! Lich King? Utaras was shocked. One must know that 100,000 years ago, the person he feared the most was the Lich King. He suddenly panicked, and his power began to collapse. At this time, Ron pushed the power of death and decay to the peak. Not good. When Utaras realized that what he saw was an illusion, it was already too late. The surging corrosive power instantly swallowed him. The powerful sky dragon began to collapse. Under the power of death and decay, no creature could survive. Impossible! How could I lose to this kid? I'm the sky dragon. I'm the leader of the Red Silk Army. I'm the overlord of the main plane. Impossible! Utaras was almost mad with anger. He desperately struggled and roared, but it was all in vain. His hands, feet, body, and soul were all corroded and completely disappeared from this world. Finally, it's over. Looking at the ruined city, Ron sighed in his heart. Utaras was dead, the Red Silk Army was destroyed, but the pain that the war left on the Noah continent could never be erased. Lord Noah was dead, and the Noah continent lost a powerful guardian. Now, Ron hated war more than ever, but war was unavoidable. He finally understood why the Sky Dragon from Bartlos prison would descend on the small secondary plane of the Noah continent. It was all because of the key to the lost continent. Ron calmly looked at the soul ring in his hand, and his heart was filled with regret. What secret was this small ring hiding? Ron was thinking, but at this time, a mournful cry broke his train of thought. Saya, Saya, don't die, don't die. Ron looked down and saw his daughter, Isis, crying and desperately shaking the little boy beside her, but the little boy didn't have any reaction. Ron's heart skipped a beat and he flew down. Father, when Isis saw Ron, she took a step back, and tears still hung on her face. Ron carefully examined Saya's injuries and said indifferently, "It's okay, he won't die yet." After saying that, a powerful death divine power was quickly injected into Saya, and after a while, Saya faintly woke up. He looked at the masked man in front of him, and was so shocked that he couldn't speak. "You are Saya? Kadina's son?" Ron smiled, stretched out his hand, and gently touched his head. "Not bad, you are quite strong." The first meeting between little Saya and his father, Ron, ended so simply, but Saya would never forget this scene for the rest of his life. In the next few days, Ron was busy. He had to reorganize the Scourge Church and integrate the humans, orcs, elves, magical beasts, and other forces under the banner of the Scourge Church. The invasion of the Red Silk Army made him realize that although the Noah continent was very big, the various races and forces were like a sheet of loose sand, and didn't belong to one another. Only by integrating all of them and twisting them into a rope could he gather the most powerful force. Ron thought that things would be very complicated, but it turned out to be very smooth. All the forces surrendered, and even the most powerful dragons of the Noah continent lowered their noble heads. The reason was very simple. First, it was because Ron had saved the continent many times, and second, it was because Ron's strength was far beyond everyone's, and he became the guardian of the Noah continent. Someone proposed to change the Noah continent to Ron continent, but Ron vetoed it. The Noah continent could only belong to Noah, and he wanted to remember this name forever. After everything was settled, Ron took his wives back to Undercity. After a short reunion, he began to think about the main plane. The main plane. How can I go to the main plane? Ron thought about it for several days until his head hurt, but he still couldn't think of any clues. Although he promised the Lich King to protect the undead in the main plane, he couldn't go to the main plane, so it was useless to say anything. At this moment, a guard of the Scourge Church hurriedly ran in. "Sir Guardian, there is a guest outside who wants to see you." "Guest? Who is it?" Ron froze. She didn't say her name. She only said, "She is your friend." The guard said hesitantly, "Friend?" Ron straightened up in his chair and frowned for a long time, but he couldn't remember who it was. He nodded gently. "Let her in." Chapter 841. A crow flew past the ruins of the Undercity and landed on a small balcony in the middle of the city. At this time, the crow emitted a black fog that slowly turned into a human figure. "Stop, who are you?" The guards of the Undercity tensed up. They gripped their weapons tightly and pointed their sharp spears at the uninvited guest. This uninvited guest was a woman, a necromancer. She was wearing a black robe that symbolized necromancers. The robe almost reached the ground, wrapping her body tightly. A hood hung from the back of her neck and covered her face. "I want to see Ron," the woman said calmly. She raised her head slightly, revealing an unusually pale face. "Ron." When the woman spoke, all the guards were shocked. One of them asked boldly, "Are you Ron's friend?" A petite figure appeared in the dim corridor leading to the Hall of the Dead. She slowly walked into the hall. "You are—" Ron's gaze paused for a moment. He suddenly saw the figure. It seemed familiar, but he couldn't remember. "Hee, Ron, we haven't seen each other for a while. You actually forgot about me." A bell-like voice giggled. The newcomer slowly took off her hood, revealing a pale and delicate face. "Nicole?" Ron saw her and was surprised and happy. He jumped up from his seat. "Why are you here?" The newcomer was a necromancer. To be precise, she was a necromancer like Klein. She was none other than the young girl Ron met during a plane mission in the Shuelon continent, Nicole. Although her strength was average, her generosity left a deep impression on Ron. However, in the end, this strange necromancer girl mysteriously disappeared in the Death Ruins. She didn't even pay Ron his reward, which made him depressed for a long time. Now that he saw her, Ron was naturally angry. He rolled his eyes and stretched out his hand. "Give it to me?" Meeting an old friend should be a surprise, but Ron looked like he was asking for a debt. Nicole was stunned. "Give what?" "The reward." Ron snorted coldly and said, "You said that you would pay me 800 black crystal coins if I escort you to the land of death, but you ran away after we got there. Now that I've run into you, who else should I ask if not you?" To be honest, Ron was quite concerned about these black crystal coins. At least, he had never seen so much money before. He was no longer the ignorant fool he used to be. He knew that the black crystal coins contained some kind of strange nomological power. This nomological power was called the Origin Energy, and could help people advance in strength. When Ron advanced to the Sanctuary Realm, he only used 5 black crystal coins. If he had brought back 800 black crystal coins at that time, he would have been able to help many people in the Calamity Army advance to the Sanctuary Realm. "Oh, so that's what you're talking about. I almost forgot about it if you didn't mention it." Nicole thought about it for a long time before she remembered. She immediately giggled. "I don't have it." Unexpectedly, Nicole spread out her hands and made a helpless gesture. Ron was dumbfounded. His left hand stopped in midair. "You don't have it? Are you lying to me? Aren't you supposed to be quite rich? You can easily take out a few thousand black crystal coins." "I used to be, but I don't anymore." Nicole curled her lips and showed an indifferent expression. "Think about it. I'm a master-level expert. I have to escape the pursuit of the undead and go to various material planes to look for my father. I have to hire servants, right? Buy medicine, right? Eat right? Fight right? My father once left me a few million black crystal coins, but I spent them all." Ron was speechless. Sigh. Ron sat on the chair in frustration. He was slightly disappointed, but when he remembered that she was the Lich King's daughter, and that he had received the Lich King's inheritance, he didn't bicker with her. He blinked and asked, "Oh right, why did you come to the Noah continent? What business do you have with me?" At the mention of this, Nicole's expression became serious. She stared at Ron without blinking. "I heard you received my father's divine inheritance and became the new Lich King." Only then did Ron remember her identity. Nicole was the Lich King's daughter, Hermes. She had wandered through many planes in order to find her father's whereabouts. Yes, Ron didn't want to hide it from her. "I did indeed receive Lord Hermes' divine inheritance and used this powerful force to defeat Utaris." Nicole's eyes reddened and a trace of sadness flashed through her expression. At this moment she knelt down. "Respected Lich King, the undead from the main plane pay their respects to you, Nicole." This time, it was Ron's turn to be dumbfounded. He stood there, not knowing what to do. Nicole raised her head, her pale face solemn. "Although I don't know how you received my father's favor, you have indeed received his divine inheritance. The current you is the new Lich King, the leader of the Scourge army, and the king of all undead." "Perhaps I am." A bitter smile appeared at the corners of Ron's mouth. "I've accepted Lord Haramo's divine core legacy, and naturally I've been given a new mission. I'm to become the Lich King and protect the billions of undead in the main plane on his behalf." Nicole nodded. "That's right. You received my father's inheritance, so you naturally have to bear the responsibility you should bear. The greater the power, the greater the responsibility." Ron sighed silently. "Nicole, you don't blame me?" "Why would I blame you? Blame you for receiving my father's inheritance?" Nicole shook her head sadly and said with a smile, "My father has his reasons for choosing you. He believes that you can fulfill your promise to him. I just can't believe that he's really dead after searching for so long in all the major planes." The two of them sighed silently and sat in their seat. There were tears in Nicole's eyes. "Ron, what do you plan to do next?" Nicole asked softly as she wiped the tears from her face. "I don't know." A bitter smile flashed across the corner of Ron's mouth. He shook his head and said, "I don't have a clue right now. I've never been to the main plane. I don't know anything about the situation there. Besides, I don't even know how to get to the main plane." "It's not difficult to get to the main plane. I can help you with that." Nicole's expression became serious and she sighed. "This is a problem that can be solved with a planar teleportation scroll, although I don't have much left, but what about after you get to the main plane? You're just one person. How are you going to rebuild the Scourge army?" "That's too difficult. With my strength, I can't help you." "You don't have to worry about that. You just have to help me get to the main plane." Ron's spirits were lifted when he heard this. He said proudly, "As long as I get to the main plane, all problems will be solved. I'm now stronger than I've ever been." Nicole stared at Ron in shock for a long while before she started to giggle. Her bell-like laughter echoed in the Hall of the Dead. "Ron, you don't think that, with your strength, you can sweep across the main plane and destroy anyone who disagrees with you? Then, you can raise the Scourge army's banner and make all the undead submit to you? Isn't that the case?" Ron asked in a daze. He looked a little silly. Naturally, that was what he planned in his heart. Ron had never worried about the Lich King's promise. Now that he had obtained the inheritance of Hermes, his strength had increased to the peak. He could even defeat Utaris, so what was there to worry about? It would just take a little effort. When he was weak, there were some things that he didn't even dare to think about. Now that he was strong, what was there that he couldn't do? It was no wonder that Ron was so confident. He now had a divine personality and was a true god. "Ouch, I can't take it anymore. My stomach hurts from laughing." In front of Ron, the Lich King, Nicole wasn't as reserved as she was in front of her father. She rubbed her stomach, which was hurting from laughing, and held back her laughter as she spoke. "You're thinking too simply. There are many strong people in the main plane. Although you've obtained the inheritance of my father's strength, do you think you can sweep through everything with just this strength? Nicole said excitedly. Ron, not to mention the Archangel of the Legion of Holy Angels, Michael, who is at the peak of his power in the main plane, even the Legion leader of the Burning Legion, Thor of the Demon Alliance, who came from Hell, they're all as strong as my father. There are countless such people in the main plane. Do you really think that with your current strength you can do whatever you want in the main plane? Nicole shook her head. Ron, I can only say that you're too naive. Moreover, although you've obtained my father's divine personality, your strength is still far from my father's. Not to mention the people I just mentioned, you can't even defeat the leaders of the main battle legions. Utaris, who you defeated, is just a small character in the eyes of the true strong people in the main plane. Ron realized that he had indeed thought too simply. Why did the Lich King fall? Naturally, it was related to the strong people in the main plane. Perhaps it was the Archangel of the Legion of Holy Angels, Michael. Even the powerful Scourge was defeated, so how could the Lich King's enemy be simple? From Nicole's tone, if Ron went to the main plane now, not to mention protecting the undead and restoring the glory of the Scourge, it would be difficult for him to even establish a foothold in the main plane. Then what should we do? Ron stared blankly for a long time before asking. At this moment, an idea flashed through his mind, and he slapped his thigh. Right. Nicole, I almost forgot. Don't you have the Scourge Staff? The Scourge Staff. Chapter 842. Why, is there a problem? Ron asked in return. Nicole was absent-minded for a while before she said, I know what you're thinking. You must be thinking that you've obtained my father's legacy and the Calamity God's staff. You'll be able to command millions of undead when you appear as his successor. Isn't that the case? Ron's old face reddened, as if she had seen through his thoughts. In fact, that was exactly what he was thinking. Actually, you're not wrong to think that way. The Calamity God's staff is the symbol of the Calamity Army. With it, you'll have the entire Calamity Army and command millions of undead. But, Nicole sighed and looked at Ron with some regret. If you had appeared not long after my father had fallen, then it would have been possible. But now, 100,000 years have passed. It's too late. Perhaps, those undead have already forgotten about my father. Is that so? Ron's gaze dimmed, and the glimmer of hope that had just risen in his heart was also extinguished. 100,000 years had passed, and the undead had most likely already forgotten about Hermes. If someone suddenly took out a weapon and demanded that everyone listen to his orders, it would be strange if they listened. Even if it was Lord Noah, whom Ron respected, if someone took out Noah's sword and demanded that Ron listen to his orders 100,000 years later, Ron would have no other choice but to treat that person as a fool. Nicole glanced at Ron and said hesitantly, Actually, at present, it might not be a good thing that the Calamity God's staff is in your hands. Do you still remember the group of people who chased after me in the Shuelon continent? It's that undead called Gibbon, right? I remember, Ron muttered. He recalled that Nicole had been chased by a group of undead in the Shuelon continent, and their goal had been the Calamity God's staff. Yes. Nicole nodded. They're from the Plague Army. Plague Army? Ron was stunned for a moment. What's that? It's also one of the main armies of the undead. To be exact, their commander is under Gibbon's father, Dreadlord Saruman. Saruman was my father's subordinate 100,000 years ago, and the Plague Army was also a part of the Calamity Army. After my father disappeared, the Plague Army broke away from the Calamity Army and became its own unit. Nicole Teely explained some of the grievances regarding the undead in the main plane. This guy called Saruman is very strong. At least, he's not any weaker than my father. After my father went missing, he set his sights on the Scourge staff. He planned to use the Scourge Staff as a token to command billions of undead and swallow the entire Scourge army. I see. Ron listened carefully and finally understood. He sighed and said, "It seems it's not safe for me to hold onto the Calamity God Staff. I'm afraid that once I reach the main plane and he finds out that I have this thing, he'll kill me and snatch the Calamity God Staff away." Ron thought to himself, how big was the difference in strength between him and Dreadlord Saruman? Even if Saruman was weak, he still had the Plague Army, while he was alone in the main plane. The difference in strength. For a moment, Ron's mind was in a mess. He thought that this mission was not so easy to complete. Otherwise, the Lich King could have just given his power to anyone. That's right. This is only one side that wants to steal the Calamity God Staff. To you, the other side is more dangerous, Nicole said. What? There's more? Ron was shocked. It seemed that he had more than one enemy in the main plane of the undead. If he really wandered around the main plane of the undead with the Calamity God Staff, it would be strange if he didn't get killed in minutes. The other side is the Calamity God Emperor, Fismai. After my father disappeared, this guy called Fismai took over the majority of the Calamity Army. He calls himself the Calamity God Emperor, but he hasn't been able to take out the Calamity God Staff, so his inheritance is a little problematic. Many undead don't care about him. Of course, the strength of this Calamity Army is far inferior to the Calamity Army from before. This is the Calamity Army that Klein was talking about, Ron muttered. He'd heard from Klein that there was still a Calamity Army in the main plane of the undead. It was just that this Calamity Army wasn't worthy of his loyalty. As for the reason, Klein didn't say. Of course, these two forces aren't the only ones who want the Calamity God Staff. Other forces also want the Calamity God Staff. They want to support a representative and control the entire undead race. For example, the demon clan you met in the Shuelon continent, and even the angel clan of the Righteous Alliance. They all want it. Nicole took a deep breath and said, for the past 100,000 years, she had put in a lot of effort to protect the Calamity God Staff. Not only did she have to hide, but she also had to search for the whereabouts of her father, the Lich King. If the Lich King hadn't left her millions of black crystal coins to buy many life-saving items, she probably wouldn't be alive now. Her strength was too weak. After listening to Nicole's explanation of the situation in the main plane of the undead, even Ron felt troubled. It was already good enough that he could stay alive in the main plane. As for restoring the glory of the Calamity Army and protecting millions of undead, he didn't even need to think about it. Do you have any good ideas? Ron asked with a frown. He was at his wits' end with the current situation. It wasn't something he could solve. I don't know. Father's order was to hand over the Calamity God Staff to the true successor, and I've already completed my mission. Nicole shook her head, a trace of confusion flashing in her eyes. She had made it very clear that her mission had already been completed. All that was left was the matter of Ron, the successor. I haven't been back to the main plane of the undead for a long time. Besides, with my strength, I'm afraid I can't help you much, Nicole said softly. Ron stood up and paced back and forth in the hall of the undead. His brows were tightly knitted, and his expression was grave. At this moment, Ron stopped in his tracks. That Calamity God Staff. Can I take a look at it? Sure. Nicole wasn't surprised. She raised her head and took out an exquisite necklace from her neck. Then, she placed her hands on the necklace and softly chanted an incantation. Not long after, the space lock on the necklace was opened. Nicole solemnly took out an item and handed it to Ron with both hands. This is the Calamity God Staff? In the Hall of the Undead, Ron quietly stroked a bone staff that was as smooth as white jade as he sighed and asked. The Calamity God Staff in Ron's hand was a strangely shaped bone staff. Its entire body was sparkling and translucent, and it was about 1.3 or 1 for meters long. The body of the staff was very smooth, and it had the bony feeling that Ron was most familiar with. However, it was also abnormally heavy, much heavier than a fine steel sword. At the top of the bone staff was a huge skull with empty eye sockets and sharp teeth. It looked very sinister. Below the huge skull was a row of smaller skulls. There were a total of 8 skulls, and they were respectively facing east, south, west, north, southeast, northeast, southwest, and northwest. Below the skulls in these 8 directions hung a string of beads. These small beads were even smaller skulls. Ron counted them carefully, and found that there were exactly 13 of them in each string. 13 was an unlucky number in the minds of the people. It represented death, and this was a meaning that the undead liked. Yes, this is the Calamity God's staff. Nicole nodded and answered. She hesitated for a moment before saying softly, "It belongs to you now. Can I use it now?" Ron loved the Calamity God's staff so much that he could not bear to part with it. This weapon gave him a different feeling, as if it was connected to his bloodline. When Ron held it in his hands, he could clearly feel the joy that the Calamity God's staff emitted, as if it was a close comrade that had not seen each other for a long time. "Of course, this is your right." Nicole shrugged her shoulders, and then reminded him softly, "But please take note, its power. It can increase your strength by at least 30%. I'm afraid that you'll destroy this place." "I have my own points." Ron nodded and softly chanted a few incantations. In an instant, the entire hall of the undead fell silent. Traces of a strange and terrifying aura seeped out and spread in all directions. The sun in the sky seemed to have lost its light, falling like a morning star. The earth fell into boundless darkness. "What's going on? What's going on? Why did the sky turn dark? What a terrifying, suffocating power!" The originally sunny and beautiful weather suddenly turned dark, but it was not completely dark. Instead, there was a sense of death and desolation. The people in the Undercity were in chaos and panic was spreading. "What's going on?" Vivian, who was discussing matters with Great Elder Homelin, stood up and said in surprise, "What a powerful aura of death! This is coming from Ron's room." Homelin's expression was serious. "Divine weapon, I can feel the aura of a divine weapon. Let's go. Let's take a look." Homelin and Vivian exchanged glances, and ran towards the Hall of the Undead at the same time. Kakik, in the Hall of the Undead, Ron held the Calamity God's scepter in his hand. The huge skull at the top seemed to be alive. The 2 empty eye sockets emitted a strange green light, and the small skull below started to spin like a top. The 8 strings of 13 pearls spun together, and the crisp sound of bones knocking could be heard. At this moment, Ron's body was already in the air, like a demon descending from the sky. With a swoosh, he waved the scepter, and a strange black chain flew out of his hand. It passed through the door of the Hall of the Undead, penetrated the spacious balcony, and crashed into a small mountain more than 15 kilometers away from the Undercity. Boom! The earth shook and the mountains shook. The Hall of the Undead in the Undercity also felt the strong tremors. "That's ridiculous!" Ron was stunned. He did not use much strength, but he caused such a huge destruction. Nicole said that the divine weapon had the effect of increasing strength. She was right. You still don't know how to control the power of the Calamity God's scepter. If this divine weapon was in my father's hands, it would only be more powerful. Chapter 843. Just then, the door of the Hall of the Dead was pushed open. Homelin, Vivian, Shea, Kadena, Aurora, and a large group of people rushed in. When they saw Nicole, they were all very surprised. Among these people, Shea knew Nicole. She only faintly nodded, which could be considered as a greeting. Ron told everyone about Nicole and the matter of going to the main plane. For a moment, the entire Hall of the Dead was in an uproar. Aurora, the dark elf, was the first to speak. Ron, every time you go out on a mission, I'm always on tenterhooks. This time, no matter what, I won't let you take the risk alone. I want to go too. I want to go too, take me, everyone suddenly clamored. Even the youngest, Saya, waved her little fist and said that she wanted to go to the main plane with her father. Ron was both touched and speechless. They really thought that he had gone on a trip. Even if his strength was already that of a god, he was not the only god in the main plane. There were countless people who were stronger than him. These people thought too simply. However, he had no choice. These people were either Ron's wives, teachers, or friends. No one could refuse. Ron could only look at Nicole. Nicole shrugged. Don't look at me. I only have 3 plain teleportation scrolls. Other than you and me, there can only be one more person. I think Sister Shea is a good choice. Nicole took the opportunity to speak up and gave Shea a look. Among these people, she only knew Shea. Although Shea had been hiding in the back silently, Nicole had already seen through her. She also wanted to go. Shea looked at Nicole gratefully. She took a few steps forward, the heavy armor on her body making a clattering sound. Then she said in a deep voice, Sir Lich King, Shea is willing to follow you to the main plane. I swear to protect you with my life. Ron was silent for a moment and agreed. First, Shea was a Death Knight and could protect him in close combat. Second, Shea was also his guardian knight. Their souls were connected, just like a summoned creature. There was no need to speak. They could communicate directly through their souls. Ron had already made his decision. Although everyone was a little helpless, they could only accept it. Although Homelin was very strong, he was the great elder. He still had to stay and look after the Scourge Church. The matter was settled. 3 days later, under the reluctant gazes of the people of the Scourge Church, they disappeared into the boundless void. Isis, do you think Father and Teacher Shea will come back? Little Saya looked at the 3 people disappearing, his eyes full of reluctance. Everyone has his own mission. Isis, who was only a few years older than Saya, slowly withdrew her gaze and smiled. We also have. Yes, we must become stronger so that we can help Father. Saya raised his small fist and said firmly. The mountains shrouded in black fog stretched as far as the eye could see. The sky was gray, and the sun could not be seen all day long. However, it did not seem too dark, as if it was the scenery after evening and before night fell. On some of the ground where the soil had hardened, some low, black plants grew. They looked like grass, but they did not seem to be. In the distant forest, there were patches of black shadows that swayed gently, looking very strange. Bang, bang, bang! A dazzling light flashed and 3 figures flashed out of the circle of light. This is the main plane of the undead? Standing on a hill, with his feet on the land of the main plane of the undead, Ron looked into the distance and asked. Yes, we have come to the main plane of the undead, Nicole replied. She gently sniffed her small nose. But I don't know where exactly we are, because the planar transmission scroll doesn't have a fixed location. The planar transmission scroll could transmit people across planes, but if there were no coordinates, it would only transmit them to any place in the main plane. Fortunately, it wouldn't transmit them to a group of strange beasts. The slight breeze carried a rotten smell, but Ron felt very comfortable. Everything here seemed to fit him perfectly. Even his soul was crying out happily with his breathing. In short, Ron felt that he belonged here. It was no wonder that all intelligent beings who cultivated the power of the soul yearned for the main plane of the undead. This was indeed a paradise for the undead. Compared to Ron, Shea's reaction was more direct. She took in large mouthfuls of the turbid and decaying space of the main plane of the undead. After a long time, she opened her eyes. I feel that my soul power has increased a little. This is the smell of rotting corpses. Nicole pointed to the hardened soil on the ground and explained, this smell is emitted by the green liquid seeping out of the soil. It can strengthen the soul. Seeing the hardened soil, It means that there must be an undead village nearby or a small town. So that's how it is. Ron nodded. Shea closed her eyes again and breathed in the decaying air with all her might. She looked like she was enjoying it very much. Caw caw caw. A small crow flew back from the sky and landed on Nicole's palm. It turned into a cloud of black fog and disappeared. Nicole's face was filled with joy. As expected, there is an undead town about 10 kilometers ahead. Let's go there and ask. All right. Ron nodded and didn't express any objection. Wait. At this moment, a voice called out to the two of them. Ron turned around and saw Shea standing there in a daze with a bitter expression. What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell somewhere? Ron hurried over and asked with concern. It's not that. Shea shook her head and stammered. I think I broke through. Ron, Shea's strength was already at the peak of the sacred domain. She was only a hair's breadth away from breaking through to the divine realm. Of course, this required an opportunity. He didn't expect that Shea would break through the sacred domain shortly after arriving at the main plane of the undead, directly advancing to the divine realm. Netherworld Knight, the most powerful death knight of the undead. This was the title bestowed upon Shea. Chapter 844. Walking on a small path made of hardened soil, the three of them stumbling along. The path leading to the undead town was as desolate as ever. 23 plus WX. This was a small black forest. Bones and broken armor could be seen on both sides of the road from time to time, adding a hint of gloominess to this undead town. There was a war here before. Ron held the long dragon bone staff in his hand as he walked slowly, saying, I can feel some restless souls here. Nicole was silent for a moment. In the undead main plane, there is no place that can avoid war. Nicole fell silent once more. The three of them walked in silence, the atmosphere somewhat stifling. At this moment, Ron's footsteps came to a halt. He looked around and tapped the ground with his bone staff. Soon after, a soft incantation reverberated in this small forest. Not long after, the forest quieted down. The stifling and terrifying atmosphere from before was swept away. A breeze blew through the forest, and the trees rustled. Nicole blinked her large, adorable eyes. What did you do? Nothing much, I just let these souls rest in peace. Let's go. Ron sighed and walked in front silently. What a weirdo. Nicole grumbled unhappily. Ron, I have a question. Shea, who had been walking silently behind them, suddenly spoke up. This undead town isn't far from us. Why can't we fly there? Fly there? Ron was stunned for a moment before saying, You can't fly in the main plane of the undead. There seems to be some kind of restriction here. I just tried it, and it became very strenuous to fly for a while. Shea made a soft "oh" sound, declining to comment. As a death knight, she wasn't good at flying. No, Ron, you're wrong. Nicole turned around and pursed her lips into a smile. It's not that you can't fly here, it's that you can't use your own strength to fly. To be precise, you'll be restricted when you use your own strength to fly. You'll use up your strength very quickly and it'll be very strenuous. Apart from creatures with natural wings, such as birds. It's said that this is a restriction set down by the highest gods. So that's how it is. Ron and Shea finally understood. The three of them chatted and soon arrived at the ghost town. This was a small town, and the walls seemed to be in name only. It looked as if they would collapse if a gust of wind blew past. Something that looked like a spirit-summoning banner fluttered in the wind, and on a relatively clean archway, one could vaguely make out the words Death Knell Town. Nicole walked to Death Knell Town's tightly shut wooden gate and gently pushed it. With a crack, the broken wooden gate collapsed, giving Nicole a fright. It's actually so weak. What's the difference between having this door and not having it? Ron shook his head, expressing that he was too disappointed. He was at a loss, just like he was when he came to the undead plane. Nicole shrugged her shoulders, indicating that it was none of her business. She then led Ron and Shea in. Death Knell Town looked like a small town on the surface, but inside it was like a small village. Other than a straight main street and some unpresentable buildings on both sides, there was nothing else. The houses of the undead were usually built with wood, the black wood harvested from outside the city. It added a gloomy feeling to this Death Knell Town. What surprised Ron and the other two was that there was only one long street in this small town, and it was completely empty. There's no one here. Nicole surveyed the surroundings. It looks like an abandoned town. No. There are people here, but they are all hiding and spying on us in the dark. Shea's eyes were like lightning. She had already seen the many pairs of black eyes hidden behind the tightly shut windows of the dilapidated houses in the town, sizing them up. Ron was already aware of this. He was stronger than Shea and Nicole, and nothing in Death Knell Town could be hidden from him. Ron closed his eyes and muttered to himself for a while. He then said, "Shea, go and knock on the door. Tell them that we are travelers from afar and need some help." Ron did not lack these things. He was just anxious to know the situation in the undead plane. Although Nicole knew a little, she had already left the undead plane for a long time. Shea nodded, took a few steps forward, and said in a clear voice, "Residents of Death Knell Town, please believe that we have come without any malice. We are mercenaries who have come from afar and need food and water. Please help us." Shea's voice was not loud, but it spread far and wide. She was a very competent mercenary and naturally knew how to deal with this unfamiliar situation. But what disappointed Ron was that Shea did not get any response even after she repeated it 3 times. "What do we do?" Shea turned around and asked. "Maybe they don't want to pay attention to us." Ron thought for a while and shook his head. "Forget it, there's no need to force it. Let's go." Shea and Nicole silently nodded. They would listen to Ron. At this moment, the window of an ordinary house in Death Knell Town was slightly pushed open. 2 pairs of eyes looked out with vigilance. "Big brother, they are not really leaving, right?" A young girl looked outside with a nervous expression. She was a necromancer and was different from Ron and Shea. She was a standard undead clan member. Like Klein, she had a pale face without a trace of blood, black hair, and black eyes that faintly glowed with a green light. "Impossible, this is the only path to the Forgotten City." The one who spoke to the undead girl was a boy who was only a few years older than her. He was an undead warrior and held a 2-handed long sword in his hands. His strong arms and slender body made him seem very agile. The undead girl looked over and saw 3 people walking towards their house. The tallest Death Knight was leading them, while the other necromancer and undead witch doctor were following behind. They claimed to be mercenaries from afar. Although I don't know how strong they are, there are knights among them. "Big brother, I think we should be more careful." The undead girl slowly looked away. Her intuition told her that these 3 people were very dangerous. "Haha, knights. So what if they're death knights?" The undead boy waved the 2-handed long sword in his hands, a sinister look in his eyes. "There are only 3 of them, while we have hundreds of undead warriors in Death Knell Town. So what if she's a knight? Look carefully, these 3 people are undead. They're not orcs with strong bodies, nor are they dwarves or gnomes who can shoot. We're definitely going to win this battle." The undead boy's eyes were filled with unprecedented confidence, a burning desire to fight, and a flash of greed. "Vitra, don't hesitate. Let's do it. These guys are wearing bright clothes. It looks like they have a lot of black crystal coins on them. It should be enough for our town to use for a while." The undead girl called Vitra hesitated for a while before finally nodding her head. "Use the undead transmission to contact the others. We'll attack as soon as they enter the ambush." The undead boy stared fixedly at Ron and the other 2, his face full of excitement. Ron quietly walked through this dark and terrifying town, his vigilant gaze sizing up his surroundings. Just as Shea had said, this wasn't an abandoned town. On the contrary, there were many people here. From the houses on both sides of the road, under the windows, on the roofs, there were pairs of spying eyes everywhere. However, these eyes were filled with fanaticism and greed. Chapter 845. Rumble. With a loud sound, Ron felt the ground beneath his feet disappear as he sank into the ground. Then, a large black net fell from above and enveloped the three of them. 23 WX. Ron was shocked. He tried to stand up, but he felt his feet tighten. Countless cold, pale arms reached out from the ground and grabbed onto Ron's feet, dragging him down. Not good, we've been ambushed. At this moment, no matter how stupid Ron was, he understood that they had fallen into a trap. Most of the residents of Deathnell Town were bandit. Kill. At this moment, a deafening battle cry came from outside the trap. From the sound of it, there were no less than 1,000 people. To be honest, Ron didn't feel much panic. There weren't many powerhouses among these people. Most of them were at the master or master rank. Of course, the definition of powerhouse was only for Ron. What he didn't understand was why these people wanted to make a move against them. He also didn't think about how to deal with these undead, who also cultivated soul force. The undead youth took the lead. At this moment, he had already jumped into the trap. He was as agile as a leopard, and his sharp eyes stared at the dragon bone staff in Ron's hand with a greedy look on his face. Holy weapon, dragon bone staff. This way, Vitra will have a very good weapon. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, the undead youth's eyes flashed with an ominous glint. The long sword in his hand flashed with light as he fiercely chopped down at Ron. His target was Ron's arm. As long as he chopped off this arm, the dragon bone staff would forever belong to him. Vitra would definitely be very happy to get this staff. In a trance, the undead youth seemed to see his sister's smile. A powerhouse from the sacred domain. As soon as the undead youth made his move, Ron quickly estimated his opponent's strength. He wasn't very strong, only at the sacred domain. On the other side, Nicole's face had already turned pale from shock. To a necromancy grand magus like her, an expert of the sacred domain was an unreachable existence, especially when it came to close combat. Just as Ron was about to counterattack, a one-handed sword stretched out from the side, blocking in front of Ron. Clank! The two weapons collided with a dazzling light. The undead youth's two-handed sword broke into two pieces. What? The undead teenager was shocked. He took a closer look and found that the one-handed knight's sword was also a holy weapon. Another saint artifact? These mercenaries aren't simple. The undead young man gnashed his teeth in anger. But he didn't have time to dwell on the matter of weapons because at the next moment, the heavy armored female knight had placed her sword on his neck. The undead young man was very fast. In fact, he was quite confident in his own speed, but he didn't expect the other party to be even faster and stop him in an instant. Don't move or I'll kill you. Shea's tall body pinched the little undead young man as if he was a little chick as she coldly shouted. The undead youth didn't dare to move with the sword on his neck. What made him even more shocked was that the female death knight holding him was actually a demigod rank expert. According to the customs of the main plane, experts who had surpassed the sacred domain and grasped part of the power of laws were called demigods. Compared to divine realm experts, they were more inclined to call them demigod. Big brother! The undead girl called Vitra rushed over with more than 1,000 undead. Seeing that her brother had been stopped in one move, she was so anxious that tears fell from her eyes. She immediately stopped the crowd that was rushing over. You let him go. Shea. Stop him, but don't take his life. At this time, Ron had already reacted and said in a deep voice. He lightly stomped his feet, and immediately there were screams from below. The zombies that were lying in ambush in the trap had already been burned clean by his soul fire. We're finally out of danger. Only then did Nicole heave a sigh of relief. Her little heart was still thumping non-stop. Netherworld night. After knowing the other party's strength, the undead youth finally knew that he had lost. A demigod rank expert, even if everyone in Deathnell Town attacked together, they might not be able to do anything to the other party. Ron, Shea, and Nicole climbed out of the trap, looking somewhat miserable. After Ron became a god, he had suffered such a great loss at the hands of an expert from the sacred domain. This was the first time since Ron had become a god that he had suffered such a great loss. Shea restrained the pale undead youth and used her sword to force the thousands of undead to retreat step by step. The undead youth was held in Shea's hand and had a dejected look on his face. Ron tidied up his clothes and looked at the undead around him. It would have been better if he didn't look at them, as he was shocked when he saw them. Instead of calling these undead in front of him undead, it would be more accurate to call them beggars. Their clothes were tattered and their bodies were full of holes. It was unknown how long it had been since they last washed them. The weapons in their hands were also very broken. Some of them had broken swords, broken axes, simple bone staffs, and only one round shield. Some of them were even holding something like a wooden stick. However, it was undeniable that these people were very strong. Not to mention the youth that was captured by Shea, even the undead girl who called him sister was an expert from the sacred domain. Apart from these two, there were many other experts at the master and master level. Such a lineup would be a powerful force in the Noah continent. However, in the undead main plane, this force didn't seem to be doing well. The two-handed long sword in the hands of the undead youth was a relatively good weapon, but it was already rusted. No wonder it broke into two when it came into contact with Shea's sword. "Who are you? What do you want?" Ron asked in a deep voice. Shea reached out and pushed the undead youth. "It's none of his business. You let go of my brother," the undead girl said anxiously. I'm the mayor of Deathnell Town. My name is White. They are all residents of Deathnell Town." The undead youth sighed, his mouth full of bitterness. He knew that it was impossible to rob them today. It was already good enough that he could keep his life. That Death Knight called Shea alone could deal with all of them, but among the three of them, the short necromancer seemed to be the leader. The undead youth wasn't clear about his strength. Let them put down their weapons and stop resisting. She's a demigod expert. Apart from the undead mage, the other two seemed to be humans. Wait, humans? How could a human be so powerful? The youth called White was bewildered. In the end, he chose to surrender. With the crisis averted, Ron breathed a sigh of relief. If it wasn't necessary, he really didn't want to fight these undead. It would go against his mission. Shea, let go of him. Shea still let go of White. Her gaze fell on the broken sword in White's hand, and a trace of mockery flashed in her eyes. White's face was full of shame. He lowered his head and didn't dare to look directly at her. When the other undead heard the words, demigod expert, they were so frightened that they threw their weapons on the ground. Ron looked at them and saw that there were all kinds of weapons. There were even fire sticks. "You are all residents of Deathnell Town. How could you rob people?" You're the mayor. How could you bring your own people to rob people?" Ron said with a straight face. In the Noah continent, such a thing was unimaginable. A mayor bringing his own people to rob people? Wasn't this a den of thieves? How could any caravans or mercenaries dare to pass by here? If this matter spread, who would do business with you? It was already good enough that they didn't send an army to eliminate you. What Ron found strange was that a town that relied on robbing people to survive could actually survive until now. Of course, from their sallow and emaciated appearance and their tattered clothes, it seemed that they didn't have a very good life. Ron carefully looked at the undead. These undead were mostly similar to Klein. They had pale faces without a trace of blood and black eyes that were slightly suffused with blue light. What was different from the undead that Ron saw was that these undead's eyes seemed to have lost their vitality. Their faces were stupefied, as if they were walking corpses. If he hadn't sensed that their souls were still alive, Ron would have thought that these people were dead. Ron remembered that he had seen this kind of look before. It was the look of despair when one couldn't see a trace of hope in front of them. White's face turned red. He gritted his teeth and said, "Our town's residents were defeated by your hands. If you want to kill them, then kill them. Why are you talking so much nonsense?" "What?" Ron smiled coldly. "Just because we are strong, you have to answer our questions unconditionally? Haha, death? What is death to the undead? Do you believe that I can pull out your souls before you die and torture them in 100 ways?" Frightened by Ron's words, the undead suddenly panicked. They cultivated soul force and naturally knew what was going on. Ron was right. Death wasn't scary to the undead. What was scary was having their souls imprisoned and losing their freedom. You are also a demigod expert?" Vitra exclaimed. White's face was deathly pale. To be able to pull out a living soul, who else could it be but a divine magus necromancer? They thought that today was really bad luck. Not only did they encounter a demigod-rank Death Knight, but they also encountered a demigod-rank necromancer. They knew in their hearts that a demigod-rank necromancer was much more terrifying than a demigod-rank Death Knight. Vitra looked into Ron's eyes. He only felt that the other party's strength was unfathomable. Of course, he wouldn't think that Ron was a god because that was too far out of reach. "Haha, what do you think?" Ron smiled coldly. He naturally wouldn't reveal his true strength. If these people thought that he was a divine realm expert, then so be it. What do you want to ask?" White finally gave up resisting and looked at his sister Vitra. They could see the fear in each other's eyes. "Very good. I like to cooperate with people." Ron smiled and asked in an amiable manner, "Let me ask you, where is this place? I know this is Deathnell Town. What I want to know is, which part of the undead plane is this?" "This is the eastern part of the undead plane. It belongs to the Hawkant district." White thought for a moment and answered. This wasn't a difficult question to answer. All the undead knew this, but why would these guys ask such a simple question? Could it be that he came from a secondary plane? Hawkant district? Ron didn't have much of an impression of this name. On the other hand, Nicole jumped up as if her butt was on fire. Chapter 846. Main Battlefield? Wyatt and Vitra had strange expressions on their faces. The war between the Scourge Army and the Legion of Holy Angels had been going on for over 100,000 years. Almost everyone in Deathnell Town, including Wyatt, had forgotten about this period of history. They weren't used to hearing these two mention it all of a sudden. "What's wrong?" Nicole felt a little strange, as though she had asked an inappropriate question. "Nothing. That war has been going on for over 100,000 years. It just feels a little strange to suddenly mention it," Wyatt said. After a moment of hesitation, he couldn't help but ask, "You don't seem to be humans from this place?" Nicole snorted in dissatisfaction. "I'm the one asking you questions, not the other way around." "That's right. We aren't humans from this place. We come from a subplane called the Noah continent," Ron said after a moment of silence. He felt that the siblings before him weren't bad people. A subplane can produce demigod experts who cultivate the power of the soul? And humans at that? Wyatt and Vitra gasped when they heard this. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. Ron's face darkened when he heard this. These words sounded like they were looking down on humans. Shea creased her brows. "Just answer whatever I ask you. What's with all this nonsense? Speak. Why are you robbing us? Do you even need to ask? Of course it's for black crystal coins." Wyatt spread his hands with a sorrowful expression, Look at our town. We're so poor that we don't even have decent weapons. What else can we do apart from robbing? On the main plain, black crystal coins were the hard currency. All transactions were done with black crystal coins. With black crystal coins, one could have everything, including soldiers, buildings, supplies, weapons, equipment, and so on. The acquisition of these things required a large amount of black crystal coins. Seeing that the residents of Deathnell Town were so poor that they didn't even have pants to wear, it was obvious that they didn't have a single black crystal coin on them. Of course, Ron didn't have many black crystal coins on him either. He had obtained them from planar missions in the past. Compared to the residents of Deathnell Town, he was already extremely wealthy. Although Nicole had a lot of black crystal coins on her, she had spent almost all of her several million black crystal coins in search of her father. How can this be? Nicole asked curiously. Don't we have black crystal ores? I remember that forgotten city, not far from here, has a black crystal mine. Black crystal coins were the crystallization of origin energy. On the main plane, every eruption of origin energy would form a black crystal mine. Black crystal coins could be obtained by mining the black crystal mine. Black crystal ores were also categorized into small, medium, large, and extra-large black crystal ores. Among them, those with a yield of less than 100 million were known as small black crystal ores, those with a yield of 100 million to 1 billion were known as medium black crystal ores, those with a yield of 1 billion to 5 billion were known as large black crystal ores, those with a yield of 5 billion to 10 billion were known as extra-large black crystal ores, and those with a yield of more than 10 billion were known as extra-large black crystal ores. Extra-large black crystal ores only existed in legends. There had never been a precedent of extra-large black crystal ores in the recorded history of the autonomous plane. Most of them were small and medium black crystal ores. However, the eruption of origin energy was random, regardless of time or location. Generally speaking, cities would form where origin energy erupted. The First Planar War in the main plane seemed to be a struggle for territory and power on the surface, but it was actually a struggle for control of black crystal ores. Since the appearance of black crystal ores was random, in theory, controlling enough territory would naturally increase the chances of obtaining black crystal ores. Black crystal ores? White smiled bitterly. We don't have any more black crystal ores. Almost all the black crystal ores in Hawkant are controlled by the orcs, including Forgotten City. How can this be? Nicole's eyes widened in disbelief. Hold on, how did our main plane of the undead get involved with the orcs? Aren't they from the main plane of power? Orcs. When Ron heard this, he recalled the orcs he had encountered in the Noah continent. They were all ferocious-looking. He just didn't know how the orcs of the main plane were different from the orcs of the Noah continent. It seems like you don't know anything. When Vitra heard this, she smiled bitterly. She exchanged glances with her brother White and sighed. Actually, the main plane of the undead doesn't belong to the undead anymore. The First Planar War in 100,000 years was a confrontation between two major factions. The Alliance of Justice formed by the main planes of Order, Life, and Elemental, and the Alliance of Evil formed by the main planes of the Undead, Hell, and Abyss. This war lasted for more than 1,000 years. Almost all the forces and races in the main plane were involved, and even some secondary planes were affected. At that time, the Alliance of Justice was led by the most powerful legion of holy angels, while the Alliance of Evil was led by the Scourge. Both sides invested hundreds of millions of troops in the war in the main and secondary planes of Amros, Pfeffetro, Order, and Undead. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, and the final battle took place in Hawkant today. This long and drawn-out war ended with the defeat of the Alliance of Evil. When the Scourge couldn't stop the attack of the Alliance of Justice, the fragile Alliance of Evil collapsed. However, the legion of holy angels who fought the scourge were also badly injured. They had no choice but to retreat to their city amongst the clouds in the main plane of order. However, the undead didn't expect that the alliance of evil would take advantage of the scourge's downfall. Under the banner of protecting the undead, they led an army to occupy the undead's territory. They massacred and drove away the original inhabitants of this land, and took over all the black crystal mines in Hokkant. They took these precious resources as spoils of war and transported them back to their main city to strengthen their own forces. The undead who lost control of the black crystal mines would only become poorer and more depressed. Of course, it wasn't that the undead didn't think of resisting. However, the Scourge had lost most of their elites in the battle with the Legion of Holy Angels. They were unable to resist the invasion of the Alliance. With the fall of the Lich King Hermes, the main plane of the undead became a pile of loose sand. In a dilapidated house, under a dim oil lamp, Wright, Nicole, and Ron sat on the floor, recounting the events of 100,000 years ago. They were so poor that they didn't even have a stool. The cold wind was pouring in through a large hole in the ceiling. After listening to the conversation between Wright and Vitra, Nicole and Shea were already furious. Ron, on the other hand, was livid. Damn it! Ron slammed his fist on the floor. The Alliance of Evil. Haha. F***ck the Alliance of Evil, these ungrateful bastards. The Scourge fought with our lives on the front lines, and after the battle, these bastards stabbed us in the back? Nicole was so agitated that her face was red. She waved her little fist and shouted, "We'll kill them sooner or later." Ron quickly calmed down. He frowned. No, what about the Scourge and Plague Legions in the main plane of the undead? Did King Fismare of the Scourge, who called himself the Scourge Emperor, just sit back and do nothing? Fismare? Hearing Fismare's name, Vitra laughed coldly. Is this guy considered an undead? He's a traitor, a disgrace to the undead, a shameless dog. Vitra's voice rose a few octaves. His lips trembled, and flames of anger danced in his eyes. Although this guy is the successor of the Scourge in name and the leader of all undead, he doesn't have the Scourge staff, the Lich King's keepsake. So many undead are unconvinced by him. Of course, this isn't important. Vitra took a deep breath and calmed himself down. What's important is that he surrendered to the Legion of Holy Angels. What? Nicole was shocked. Is this true? Although it's not made public, all undead know about it. This guy gives more than 70% of the black crystal coins he mines every year to the Legion of Holy Angels. Wright rubbed his hands so hard that his knuckles cracked. I see. Ron finally understood why Klein always had a look of disdain when the Scourge of the Mortal Plane was mentioned. Ron muttered to himself. What about the Plague Legion? Did the Dreadlord Saruman also surrender to the Legion of Holy Angels? No, he didn't. Wright hurriedly said. But I heard that he has the support of the strongest legion from Hell, the Burning Legion. I don't know what kind of deal they have. Burning Legion? Thor? Ron's expression was a bit ugly. The Burning Legion was their old rival. After listening to Wright and Nicole's explanation, Ron finally understood the distribution of power in the undead plane. Simply put, ever since the Lich King fell, the entire undead plane was in a state of disunity. Most of the black crystal mines were controlled and countless wealth flowed out. It was no wonder that Klein would rather rely on Utaris. He knew that there was no hope for the undead. What should I do? At this moment, Ron's heart was at a loss. The undead situation was extremely bad. Even if he inherited the Lich King's divinity, he couldn't change anything with his own strength. After thinking for a while, Ron finally thought of a key point, and that was the black crystal mines. The undead had fallen because they lost the black crystal mines. But where could they find black crystal mines? Ron thought of the Forgotten City. As soon as he mentioned this idea, Shea and Nicole unanimously opposed it. No, it's too risky. There's an army of orcs stationed in the Forgotten City's Black Crystal Mine. With just the few of us, we won't be able to fight against them, Nicole said. The orcs also have god-level experts. But, apart from this, what other way can we get a large amount of black crystal coins? Ron asked in return. Gods? Wright and Vitra looked at each other, joy in their eyes. That person had mentioned gods. Could it be that this unassuming necromancer in front of them was actually a god? Your Excellency, it's not impossible to get a large amount of black crystal coins. At this moment, Wright stood up and respectfully bowed. He slightly raised his head, a trace of passion flashing through his calm eyes. Chapter 847. Main Battlefield? Wyatt and Vitra had strange expressions on their faces. The war between the Scourge Army and the Legion of Holy Angels had been going on for over 100,000 years. Almost everyone in Deathnell Town, including Wyatt, had forgotten about this period of history. They weren't used to hearing these two mention it all of a sudden. What's wrong? Nicole felt a little strange. It was as though she had asked an inappropriate question. It's nothing. That war has been going on for over 100,000 years. It just feels a little strange to suddenly mention it, Wyatt said. After a moment of hesitation, he couldn't help but ask, You don't seem to be humans from this place? Nicole snorted in dissatisfaction. I'm the one asking you, not the other way around. That's right. We aren't humans from this place. We come from a subplane called the Noah continent, Ron said after pondering for a moment. He felt that the siblings before him weren't bad people. A subplane can produce demigod experts who cultivate the power of the soul? And humans at that? Wyatt and Vitra gasped when they heard this. Their eyes were filled with disbelief. Ron's face darkened when he heard this. These words sounded like they were looking down on humans. Shea creased her brows. Just answer whatever I ask you. What's with all this nonsense? Speak. Why are you robbing us? Do you even need to ask? Of course it's for black crystal coins. Wyatt spread his hands with a sorrowful expression. Look at our town. We're so poor that we don't even have decent weapons. What else can we do apart from robbing? On the main plane, black crystal coins were the hard currency. All transactions were done with black crystal coins. With black crystal coins, one could have everything, including soldiers, buildings, supplies, weapons, equipment, and so on. The acquisition of these things required a large amount of black crystal coins. Seeing that the residents of Deathnell Town were so poor that they didn't even have pants to wear, it was obvious that they didn't have a single black crystal coin on them. Of course, Ron didn't have many black crystal coins on him either. He had obtained them from planar missions in the past. Compared to the residents of Deathnell Town, he was already extremely wealthy. Although Nicole had a lot of black crystal coins on her, she had spent almost all of her several million black crystal coins in search of her father. How can this be? Nicole asked curiously. Don't we have black crystal ores? I remember that Forgotten City, not far from here, has black crystal ores. Black crystal coins were the crystallization of origin energy. On the main plane, every eruption of origin energy would form a black crystal mine. Black crystal coins could be obtained by mining the black crystal mine. Black crystal ores of origin energy of 100 million to 1 billion were small black crystal ores of origin to 5 billion to 10 billion ores were large black crystal ores to 5 billion to 10 billion to 10 billion were large crystal ores to 10 billion and 10 billion to 10 billion were large crystal ores to 10 billion to 10 billion. Large ores to 10 billion ores and large ores to 10 billion to 10 billion to 10 billion large ores to 10 billion to 10 billion large ores to 10 billion to and 10 billion ores and large ores and however, the eruption of origin energy was random, regardless of time or location. Generally speaking, cities would be formed where origin energy erupted. The First Planar War in the main plane seemed to be a struggle for territory and power on the surface, but it was actually a struggle for control of black crystal ores. Since the appearance of black crystal ores was random, in theory, controlling enough territory would naturally increase the chances of obtaining black crystal ores. Black crystal ores? White smiled bitterly. We don't have any more black crystal ores. Almost all the black crystal ores in Hawkant are controlled by the orcs, including Forgotten City. How can this be? Nicole's eyes widened in disbelief. Wait, how can our main plane of the undead have anything to do with the orcs? Aren't they from the main plane of power? Orcs. When Ron heard this, he recalled the orcs he had come into contact with in the Noah continent. They were all ferocious-looking. He just didn't know how the orcs of the main plane were different from the orcs of the Noah continent. It seems like you don't know anything. When Vitra heard this, she smiled bitterly. She exchanged glances with her brother White and sighed. Actually, the main plane of the undead doesn't belong to the undead anymore. The First Planar War in 100,000 years was a confrontation between two major factions. The Justice Alliance formed by the main planes of Order, Life, and Elemental, and the Evil Alliance formed by the main planes of the Undead, Hell, and Abyss. This war lasted for more than 1,000 years. Almost all the forces and races in the main plane were involved, and even some secondary planes were affected. At that time, the Justice Alliance was led by the most powerful legion of holy angels, while the Evil Alliance was led by the Scourge. Both sides invested hundreds of millions of troops in the war in Amros, Pfeffetro, Order, and Undead. Both sides suffered heavy casualties, and the final battle took place in the main battlefield of today's Hawkant. This long war ended with the defeat of the Evil Alliance. When the Scourge could not stop the Justice Alliance's attack, the fragile Evil Alliance collapsed. However, the Legion of Holy Angels who fought the Scourge also suffered heavy losses. They had no choice but to retreat to their city amongst the clouds in the main plane of Order. However, the undead did not expect that the Evil Alliance would take advantage of the Scourge's downfall. Under the banner of protecting the undead, they led their army to occupy the undead's territory. They used force to kill and expel the original inhabitants of this land, and took over all the black crystal mines in Hawkant. They took these precious resources as spoils of war and transported them back to their main city to strengthen their own forces. The undead who lost control of the black crystal mines would only become poorer and weaker. Of course, it was not that the undead did not think of resisting. However, the Scourge lost most of their elites in the battle with the Legion of Holy Angels. They were unable to resist the invasion of the Evil Alliance. With the fall of the Lich King Hermes, the main plane of the undead became a pile of loose sand. In a dilapidated house, under a dim oil lamp, Wright, Nicole, and Ron sat on the floor, recounting the events of 100,000 years ago. They were so poor that they did not even have a stool. The cold wind was pouring in through a large hole in the ceiling. After listening to the conversation between Wright and Vitra, Nicole and Shea were already furious. Ron, on the other hand, was livid. Damn it! Ron slammed his fist on the floor. The Evil Alliance. Haha. F***ck the Evil Alliance, these ungrateful bastards. The Scourge fought with our lives on the front lines. After the battle, these bastards actually stabbed us in the back? Nicole was so agitated that her face was red. She waved her little fist and shouted, "Sooner or later, we'll kill them." Ron quickly calmed down. He frowned. No, what about the Scourge and Plague Legions in the main plane of the undead? Did the self-proclaimed Scourge Emperor Fismare of the Scourge just sit by and do nothing? Fismare? Hearing Fismare's name, Vitra laughed coldly. Is this guy even considered an undead? He's a traitor, a disgrace to the undead, a shameless lackey. Vitra's voice rose a few octaves. His lips trembled, the flames of anger dancing in his eyes. Although this guy is the successor of the Scourge in name and the leader of all undead, he does not have the Scourge staff, the Lich King's keepsake. So many undead are not convinced by him. Of course, this is not important. Vitra took a deep breath and calmed his agitated emotions. What's important is that he surrendered to the Legion of Holy Angels. What? Nicole was shocked. Is this true? Although it's not made public, all undead know about it. This guy gives more than 70% of the black crystal coins he mines every year to the Legion of Holy Angels. Wright rubbed his hands so hard that his knuckles cracked. I see. At this moment, Ron finally understood why Klein always had a look of disdain on his face whenever the scourge of the mortal plane was mentioned. Ron pondered for a moment. What about the Plague Legion? Did the Dreadlord Saruman also surrender to the Legion of Holy Angels? No, he didn't, Wright hurriedly said. But I heard that he has the support of the strongest legion from Hell, the Burning Legion. I don't know what kind of deal they have. Burning Legion? Thor? Ron's expression was a bit ugly. The Burning Legion was their old rival. After listening to Wright and Nicole's explanation, Ron finally understood the distribution of power in the undead plane. Simply put, ever since the Lich King fell, the entire undead plane was in a state of disunity. Most of the black crystal mines were controlled, and countless riches flowed out. It was no wonder that Klein would rather rely on Utaris. He knew that the undead had no hope. What should I do? At this moment, Ron's heart was at a loss. The undead situation was extremely bad. Even if he inherited the Lich King's divinity, he couldn't change anything by himself. After thinking for a long time, Ron finally thought of a key point, and that was the black crystal mines. The undead had fallen because they lost the black crystal mines. But where could they find black crystal mines? Ron thought of the Forgotten City. As soon as he mentioned this idea, Shea and Nicole unanimously opposed it. No, it's too risky. There's an army of orcs stationed in the Forgotten City's black crystal mine. With just the few of us, we won't be able to fight against them, Nicole said. The orcs also have god-level experts. But, apart from this, what other way do we have to get a large amount of black crystal coins? Ron asked. Gods? Wright and Vitra looked at each other, joy in their eyes. That person mentioned gods. Could it be that this unremarkable necromancer in front of them was actually a god? Your Excellency, it's not impossible to get a large amount of black crystal coins. At this moment, Wright stood up and respectfully bowed. He slightly raised his head, a trace of passion flashing through his calm eyes. Chapter 848. The Sunset Mountain Range was located between the Deathnell town and the Forgotten City. It was like a long winding dragon that extended all the way to the horizon. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on this enormous mountain range that stretched for thousands of miles, painting the entire mountain range with a layer of gold. Below an unremarkable and ordinary valley in the Sunset Mountain Range, a strange building had been built. This building seemed to wrap up the entire valley. Something that looked like bones extended along the valley, emitting a metallic luster. Around the valley, several dozen undead were busy. Their bodies were wrapped in long black robes, revealing only their eyes. They were chanting an incantation in a low voice. This is the place? Ron, Shea, and Nicole were lying on their stomachs on a small hill, observing the building's movements from above. That's right, the black crystal mine is here. White nodded and replied. Beside him was his younger sister, Vitra. At this moment, White's eyes revealed a look of resentment. Actually, this black crystal mine was first discovered by us siblings. At that time, when the origin energy erupted, we just so happened to be in the vicinity. We built a ghost mine here. And we have already mined and used it. Unfortunately, we don't know how the news leaked out, and the shadow thieves targeted us. Not only did they seize our black crystal mine, they also killed and injured our people. Even the black crystal coins we mined were all robbed by them. The ghost mine was a building specially built by the undead for the purpose of mining black crystal ores. Without this building, there was no way to condense the gas-like origin energy into black crystal coins. Shadow Bandit Group? Ron's brows creased as he looked at the undead before him. He saw a small cave entrance at the bottom of the strange building called the Ghost Mine. Some undead were pushing carts filled with black crystal coins in and out of the cave entrance. In front of the cave entrance, there were several dozen heavily armored death knights guarding it. At the entrance to the valley, there were countless defensive towers and undead hidden in the shadows. It could be said that unless they wanted to, not even a fly would be able to escape. That's right, the Dark Shadow Bandits. Speaking of this, Vitra gnashed his teeth in anger. They are bandits who have been living in the Sunset Mountains for a long time. They kill people like flies, commit all kinds of crimes, and are very powerful. Their leader is a woman, an undead bandit with the strength of a peak demigod. We are no match for them. Really? Shea turned around and looked at her with a half-smile. Then what's the difference between you and them? Don't they still kill us and steal our things? Vitra blushed. No. We are different from them. Vitra's face turned red, but he couldn't tell the difference between them and the shadow thieves. How many of them are there? Ron didn't intend to argue with the siblings on this issue. He casually swept his consciousness and discovered several thousand sacred domain experts in the valley, as well as more than 10 divine domain experts. It seemed that the shadow thieves weren't weak at all. Compared to them, the residents of Deathnell Town couldn't even compare to a finger of theirs. The shadow thieves have more than 20,000 people. Apart from some of the weaker ones, their elites are all here. White whispered in Ron's ear. Ron, what do you think? Shea turned to look at Ron. From the burning desire for battle in her eyes, it could be seen that Shea couldn't wait any longer. White and Vitra also looked at Ron expectantly. As soon as he gave the order, they would charge out and seize the stronghold and steal all the black crystal coins. This time, White had brought all the residents of Deathnell Town with him. Almost all of them had come out. They hid under a small hill, quietly waiting for his orders. Ron pondered for a moment. To be honest, it would be a lie to say that he wasn't tempted by this black crystal mine that could directly produce black crystal coins. With his current strength, it wouldn't be a problem for him to sweep through this black crystal mine. The problem was, if he were to make a move, would it attract the attention of other forces, such as Forgotten City? Once the orcs of the Forgotten City noticed him, there would be endless trouble. At the very least, with his current strength, there was no way he could contend against the orcs. But what if he didn't take action? Ron took a deep breath. If he didn't take action, he would have no chance at all. Without black crystal coins, he would have nothing. The black crystal mine before him was his chance. No matter how stupid Ron was, he wouldn't just let this opportunity slip away. Only with a large amount of black crystal coins could he purchase weapons, equipment, recruit manpower, increase his strength, establish his own force, or even create a new scourge. All of these could only be achieved with a black crystal mine. Although this was only a small black crystal mine, and according to White, it only had a few tens of millions of equivalents, which meant that it could produce tens of millions of black crystal coins, it was already a huge fortune for Ron. He needed this fortune. Let's do it. A trace of ruthlessness flashed in Ron's eyes. This time, he had decided to go all out. Shea. What? Get ready. Yes. When Shea heard this, she was immediately overjoyed. Nicole and White were also overjoyed. With a god like Ron taking action, everything would become a lot simpler. High up in the valley of the setting sun mountain range stood an undead woman. She was wearing a tight black short shirt and gray thief leather pants. Her perfectly round and straight legs were full of explosive power. She was not wearing any armor. For an undead thief who was known for their agility, heavy armor was a burden. At this moment she was like a leopard, full of wildness and arrogance. Cronius stared at the ghost mines motionlessly. The ghost mines produced over 1,000 black crystal coins every day, which were all piled up in their temporary warehouse. At this moment the undead warehouse was already filled to the brim with black crystal coins. With so many black crystal coins, the strength of the dark shadow bandits grew rapidly. Not only did they purchase a large amount of weapons and equipment, but they also used the origin energy contained in the black crystal coins to summon a large number of ghost towers for defense. It was just like a huge stronghold. If not for the lack of time, Cronia even wanted to build a city here. This black crystal mine was snatched from the hands of those poor bastards in Death Knell Town, but so what? The law of the jungle was the rule of survival on the main plane. It was impossible for them to protect this black crystal mine with just the old and weak. Since that was the case, they might as well let it fall into their own hand. However, even though the dark shadow bandits were making a lot of money every day, Cronia's face was still full of worry. Not for anything else, but for the orcs of the Forgotten City. The setting sun mountain range was not far from the Forgotten City. They would find this place sooner or later. Cronia thought to herself, should I transport all the black crystal coins I've mined? Or should I build a strong city here to resist the orcs? Transporting these black crystal coins would mean giving up on the black crystal mine. Cronia was unwilling to do so, but she knew that she did not have the ability to resist the orcs. The Forgotten City had already become the orcs' stronghold. An orc army of more than 100,000 was garrisoned there. Once war broke out, they could mobilize an army of 1,000,000. Compared to the undead, the orcs were much more powerful. In a one-on-one situation, the undead were simply no match for the orcs. However, giving up on the wealth in her hands was also impossible. Cronia could not make up her mind to give up until the last moment. After all, she was not the only member of the Dark Shadow Bandits. The undead, who were used to living a poor life, suddenly losing such a large amount of wealth would cause a huge uproar. Forget it. Let's not move for the time being. Let's observe the situation first. Cronia sighed, thinking silently in her heart. Snatching this black crystal mine from the hands of the white siblings had put her in a dilemma. Suddenly, Cronia creased her brows and her body tensed up as if she was going to fight. *Ping. A black shadow appeared behind Cronia. That black shadow quickly condensed into a human figure. Boss! Hearing this form of address, Cronia slightly lowered her hostility. As a thief adept at sneak attacks, her nerves were always tense. However, the person who came wasn't an enemy, but one of her subordinates. Oh. So it's Vice Leader Haend. How is it? You put down your work and came to see me. Did something happen? Haend was a necromancer with strength at the peak of God's domain. He was only slightly weaker than Cronia. However, as a necromancer, he was powerful and highly regarded by Cronia, making him the vice leader. Yes, something did happen. Haend nodded. He stared fixedly at Cronia's lithe figure wrapped in robe with adoration in his eyes. After a while, he reluctantly withdrew his gaze and sternly said, "Don't worry, Cronia, I'm not going to let you go." Boss, do you still remember the white siblings from Death Knell Town? White, Vitra, this black crystal mine was snatched from them. How could Cronia not remember? She sneered and said, "Did they come looking for us again?" Yes. Haend nodded and said, "They have gathered more than 1,000 people at the foot of the mountain. It seems like they intend to attack our stronghold." More than 1,000 people. That was almost all the strength of the entire Death Knell Town. However, it was not enough to deal with the Shadow Bandit. White and Vitra were only in the sacred domain. They dared to attack the stronghold with such little strength? Even Cronia could not help but admire their courage. It seems like they are tired of living. They actually dare to come looking for us again? Cronia sneered, a trace of killing intent flashing in her eyes. She had let them go back then because she felt that they were pitiful. Now that they actually came looking for trouble, there was no need to be polite. Cronia did not recall that this black crystal mine was snatched from them. However, even if she did, there was no need to care. The law of the jungle had always been the rule in the main plain. But this time, they seemed to have something to rely on. Haend muttered. Among them, I see a powerful death knight, a peak demigod expert. Peak demigod. Cronia's expression finally changed. If there really was a demigod pinnacle death knight, then it would be a little tricky. In Hawkant, a demigod pinnacle was usually a powerhouse who ruled over a region. Although the Shadow Bandits had more than a dozen demigod powerhouses, only Cronia and Haend were at the pinnacle of demigod powerhouses. Is it Gosling? Rio Devik? Or Gordy? Cronia quickly searched her mind and said the names of a few peak demigod death knights. These were all famous forces in Hawkant, and some of them were not weaker than the Shadow Bandit. None of them. Haend shook his head. I haven't seen this person. It's a woman. My crow wanted to get closer to observe, but she was very vigilant. As soon as it got close, it was destroyed by her frost arrow. That's right, that peak demigod expert is a human. Human? Chapter 849. Below the valley of the setting sun mountain range, Shea, Nicole, White, and his sister were ready for battle. The residents of Deathnell Town wore tattered clothes and had crude weapons, but their morale was high. This was because they knew that behind them stood a god, a true god with a godhead. For the undead, military strength was never a problem. In just a short while, the undead summoned tens of thousands of undead creatures. Walking corpses, zombies, skeletons, gargoyles, terror knights, and other undead creatures were summoned. They roared and howled, and a strange aura reverberated in the valley. White held a broken sword in his hand, which had become like this after the battle with Shea. Apart from this, he couldn't take out a better weapon. White walked forward and said to Shea, who was sitting on the nightmare beast, Lady Shea, do you want me to lead some people to scout the way first? You can follow behind. After knowing Ron's strength, White already had the intention to rely on him. In the current Hawkant, Ron was worthy of being the strongest. He wanted to show his loyalty and bravery in front of Ron. Only in this way would he be valued by Ron. No. And Shea shook her head and rejected his suggestion. Her eyes flashed with a trace of sharpness. They have already discovered us. This kind of action is meaningless. We will attack directly. Yes. White didn't have the slightest doubt towards Shea's order. He raised the broken sword high and turned around. His distorted face became extremely ferocious. He loudly said to the undead behind him, all the undead in Deathnell Town, listen to me. Lady Shea orders us to attack. Attack, we pledge our lives to follow. Lady Shea, kill them. Smash them. White's words ignited the fighting spirit of the undead, who were like a pool of stagnant water. Although their clothes were ragged and their weapons were crude, and some of them were even holding a stick, the burning fighting spirit in their eyes could no longer be concealed. They knew that there was a powerful god watching them from the shadows above the valley, taking care of them. Shea slowly drew her one-handed knight sword from her bosom and drew a circle in the air with the tip of the sword pointing forward. Attack. Kill. 1,000 undead creatures let out an earth-shattering roar in unison, along with the roar of tens of thousands of undead creatures, shaking the entire valley. Countless zombies, ghouls, and skeletons charged forward. At this moment, Shea activated her evil aura. The Death Knight was a natural leader. Her aura domain was enough to cover tens of thousands of undead and undead creatures. In a short period of time, their recovery ability was multiplied. For example, if their bodies were cut so deep that their bones could be seen, they would be as good as new in less than 3 minutes. At this moment, tens of thousands of undead creatures transformed into a black torrent that swept through the entire Shadow Bandits' encampment. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! The Shadow Bandits stationed at the foot of the valley sounded the alarm. Countless Death Knights, undead warriors, and undead thieves rushed out of the ghost tower. Some necromancers began to summon undead creatures. A battle between the undead and the undead had begun. The nightmare under Shea was very fast. Before the undead at the back could catch up, it had already killed its way into the Shadow Bandits' encampment like a whirlwind. Not good, it's a peak demigod Death Knight. The Dark Shadow Bandit squad leader, who was guarding the camp below, was so scared that his face turned pale. Although he was also a Death Knight, his divine power was only at advanced demigod level. He was far from a demigod pinnacle level. He naturally knew how terrifying a demigod pinnacle level Death Knight was. Attack! Quickly attack! The Shadow Bandits' captain crazily shouted. In an instant, countless bone spears and bone arrows rose from the encampment and swarmed towards Shea. Defend! Shea didn't even look at these low-level attacks. She raised her shield in front of her and a black aura appeared around her body. The nightmare quickened its pace. Boom! 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 The attacks fell like cannonballs, blooming around Shea. Shea faced the storm-like attacks and took the lead to kill her way into the encampment. Kill! Shea brandished the long sword in his hand and split a black knight into 2 halves. The nightmare beast rushed forward and dozens of skeleton warriors were sent flying in the Shadow Bandits' encampment. Shea charged left and right, sweeping everything in her path. With her solid defense and powerful strength, Shea fully displayed the might of a Death Knight. At this moment, her body was covered with countless bone arrows, but her ferocious strength didn't decrease in the slightest. Shea wasn't invulnerable to injuries, but the Death Knight's innate powerful recovery ability made her unafraid of death. Quickly! Surround that guy. On one hand, the Shadow Thieves' captain commanded the undeads to fight, while on the other hand, he rode a huge bone horse and rushed toward Shea. Boom! The battle between the 2 Death Knights exploded with earth-shattering might. A powerful airflow reverberated in all directions. After clashing with Shea, the Shadow Bandits' captain only felt his blood churning. He already knew that his strength was far inferior to his opponent's. Quickly! Quickly follow Lady Shea. White and Vitra weren't willing to fall behind. Seeing Shea fighting the entire Shadow Bandits alone, they rushed forward to support her. In an instant, the undead from both sides clashed. Screams from the depths of their souls resounded throughout the valley. The residents of Deathnell Town had no equipment and only crude weapons. They relied on their high morale to gain the upper hand at first. They killed and injured the guards, seized their weapons, and joined the battle. However, the difference in strength between Deathnell Town and the Shadow Bandits was too great. With the Shadow Bandits' endless reinforcements, the balance of the battle slowly tilted towards the Shadow Bandits' side. Kill! White had already thrown away the broken half of his blade. At this moment, he was holding a long 2-handed sword. He had snatched it from an enemy. This 2-handed sword was a sacred artifact. With the sacred artifact in his hand, White brandished it like a windmill. At this moment, White's strength had greatly increased. With a single slash, he chopped off the head of an abomination. The abomination was a huge fatty formed from countless corpses and flesh. It was extremely ugly and malevolent. It brandished something that looked like a kitchen knife in one hand and a shield in the other. The third hand that stretched out from its abdomen was a strange hook. A monster like this was extremely difficult to deal with. But now, White had finished it off with a single slash. Kill! White, who was covered in blood, held the abomination's head in one hand and raised the sword in the other as he let out a long cry. What's going on? Hiding in the dark, Cronia was dumbstruck. She sucked in a breath of cold air. Were these still the undead of Deathnell Town? How did they become so brave? She recalled the undead that she had seen before. They were simply two different creatures. What was it? It gave these undead great courage, so much so that they used their weak forces to attack the Dark Shadow Bandits, who were many times stronger than them. Although the Dark Shadow Bandits were much stronger, they felt somewhat helpless when facing these undead that were not afraid of death. There seemed to be something extra on their bodies. Was it courage? Strength? Fighting spirit? Or Cronia did not see fear in their eyes. Looking at the undead of Deathnell Town before her, a scene seemed to appear in her eyes. The angels flying in the sky were all wearing gorgeous armor. They were singing hymns, and their bodies were filled with holy light. Countless light balls fell like raindrops. Below them was a group of undead in ragged clothes. They did not have gorgeous armor, powerful weapons, or wings that could fly. But in their eyes there was only a burning fighting spirit and an unyielding light. Under the guidance of the blood-colored skull flag, they faced the powerful attacks falling from the sky. Every step they took had to pay a huge price, but these undead did not care. They could only move forward and forward. This was a scene from the countless battles in the main battlefield of Hawkant 100,000 years ago. The undead of that time had something that the undead of today did not have. This indestructible power was called faith. Faith in death, thirst for power, loyalty to evil, yearning for rule. The noble undead had a kind of faith, a kind of spirit. This spirit was the most powerful force of the undead. This undead of only 1,000 undead could not compare to a small team of Dark Shadow Bandits in terms of strength. But they had a firm faith, and they burst out with an earth-shattering aura. The Dark Shadow Bandits went from shock to fear, from fear to reverence. They could not think of anything that could support these weak undead. They had something that they did not have. The Dark Shadow Thieves retreated. Although they were still very strong, everyone knew that they had lost. They had lost completely. Damn it! What the hell are these guys doing? How could they beat the puny force of Deathnell Town to this extent? Looking at the scene before him, Haend cursed. He did not notice that his voice was trembling as he spoke. No. It's not their fault. Cronia shook her head. Even if I was in command, the result would have been the same. Are we just going to let it go? Haend gritted his teeth and said, I'm not willing to withdraw from the valley with my tail between my legs and give the black crystal mine to them. Cronia waved her hand and interrupted Haend's words. We will definitely win. Although they are very courageous, but the difference in strength cannot be made up for by courage alone. What I am considering is how to resolve this matter with the least amount of casualties. Haend did not say anything. He knew that Cronia was stronger than him, and she had her own ideas. Cronia's beautiful eyes swept across the crowd before finally landing on Shea. Is it her? The person who made the undead of Deathnell Town regain their lost courage. Could it be her? After thinking about it, Cronia felt that it was not likely. She could not think of any reason. Although this Death Knight was powerful, it was not undefeatable. With Cronia's strength, she could fight with her. She is a helper invited by the residents of Deathnell Town? Where did they find such a powerful Death Knight? Humans? Hawkant? Or even the entire undead main plane, there is no such powerful human. I will deal with that Death Knight. Cronia paused and said, I will leave this place to you. After saying that, Cronia's figure disappeared without waiting for Haend's response. Shea had just chopped a Terror Knight into pieces when she suddenly felt her heart palpitate, as though she was being targeted by a wild beast. Shea's thoughts flashed as she raised the shield in her hand to block in the air. Ding! Unexpectedly, the sound of metal colliding was heard in the void. Shea tenderly shouted, and the long sword in her other hand fiercely slashed forward. Clang! 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 A phantom appeared in the air and exchanged a few blows with Shea. The other party's speed was as fast as a ghost, causing her to be unable to see clearly. Ugh! Shea only felt a chill behind her as the other party's dagger pierced into her waist. Damn it! Even though she was wearing a thick knight's heavy armor, Shea still felt a piercing pain from her waist. Her body quickly tensed up as she swung the shield in her hand. Boom! The two sides quickly separated. A petite black figure was pushed back a few steps by Shea's powerful strength. She could no longer use shadow sneak to hide her figure and slowly revealed a beautiful but pale face. Cronia licked her lips that had a trace of blood, looking both beautiful and charming. Well done, human. I have not met an opponent like you in a long time. Your blood excites me. You finally came out, Cronia. Chapter 850. Shea suffered a slight loss from the other party's sudden sneak attack. However, she was a Death Knight, so such a small injury was nothing to her. You know my name? Cronia stared blankly, feeling a little strange. But after thinking about it, she immediately understood. She came with the White siblings, so it would be strange if she didn't know. The things here don't belong to you. Shea didn't answer her question. Riding on the nightmare, she pointed her sword forward and coldly said, "Immediately lead your people away, or else." "Or else what?" Cronia chuckled, her eyes slightly narrowed, revealing her seductive appearance. "Die." Shea didn't even look at her. Her eyes flashed, and her killing intent gradually condensed. "Ha ha ha! You want to kill me?" Cronia giggled. At this time, she stopped laughing and coldly said, "Do you feel a numbing sensation coming from your waist?" "What?" Shea wrinkled her brows. At this time, she indeed felt the place where she was stabbed by the other party was starting to feel numb. She was startled and angry. You poisoned your dagger?" "Hee, it's just a small skill." Cronia used the undead thief skill, Poison Dagger. She didn't poison her weapon, but the poison was naturally produced by the skill. Shea took a few deep breaths and quickly calmed down. She mobilized all the strength in her body and quickly suppressed the spreading poison. It had to be said that the poison used by Cronia was indeed powerful. Shea relied on the Death Knight's strong body and super recovery ability to barely suppress it. At this time, Shea opened her eyes and indifferently said, "It's just a small poison. I never thought that these lowly things could cause any big waves." Seeing Shea recover so quickly, Cronia's expression couldn't help but slightly change. "You suppressed it. When it erupts, you'll have a good time." Shea didn't answer. Her lowered sword fully expressed her intention. She wanted to end the battle before the poison erupted. Cronia gritted her teeth. With a swish, two daggers extended from her waist, emitting a faint green radiance. In a head-on clash, Cronia wasn't Shea's match. Her forte lay in ambushes. But now, Cronia couldn't care less. If she took a step back, the shadow bandits might fall apart. No one would care about a loser's status and dignity. The battle in the valley had reached its climax. Both sides had suffered heavy casualties. As more and more reinforcements from the dark shadow bandits arrived, the weakness of Deathnell Town's lack of strength was exposed. Shea turned a deaf ear to this situation. She only stared at the opponent in front of her without moving. What the hell is this guy doing? Cronia was both surprised and suspicious. In the thief's subconscious, she could faintly sense a hint of imperceptible danger. The other party was too calm, as if he had something to rely on. Everything seemed too abnormal. "Forget it, I don't care. Let's fight." Cronia's fighting spirit was ignited by the intense fighting and the smell of blood in the surroundings. She let out a delicate shout, and her lithe body turned into a phantom. The holy weapon in her hand turned into a radiance as she pounced at Shea. "Come on." Shea sneered and met the attack with her longsword. Boom! Two huge forces collided, erupting with intense sparks. A whirlwind seemed to blow on the battlefield. Only two figures could be seen fighting fiercely in the fog. Just as the two undead forces were fighting to the death for the black crystal ore in the valley, an army of about 5,000 beastmen silently arrived at the foot of the setting sun mountain range. On the boundless plains, several hundred giant wolves were running at high speed. These giant wolves were exotic beasts that the beastmen had tamed using special methods, frost wolves. These arrogant creatures were trained to be obedient by the beastmen, and they were as easy to command as their own arms. Every adult frost wolf's fighting strength was equivalent to a master powerhouse. The beastmen on the backs of the frost wolves were abnormally strong. They were even more muscular than the tallest human man. They had green faces and sharp fangs, and their bodies were covered in muscles. They wore heavy armor and held all kinds of heavy weapons like spiked clubs in their hand. With the beastmen's strength, those light weapons were not suitable for them at all. These were only the beastmen's wolf cavalry vanguard, the frost wolf army from Forgotten City. They were one of the most powerful soldiers of the beastmen tribes, plunderers. Forgotten City was originally a city of the undead. Now, it had been occupied by the beastmen tribe from the main plane of strength, the frost wolf army. They demolished the undead's buildings and replaced them with beastmen's. As for the black crystal ore in Forgotten City that originally belonged to the undead, it was also unceremoniously taken away by the beastmen. With the large amount of black crystal coins produced by the black crystal ore, the influence of the frost wolf army expanded rapidly. They could almost rival the strongest beastmen tribe, the Bloodhoof army. Countless frost wolves ran like the wind in the valley. Although these exotic beasts had huge bodies, they were abnormally agile. Their running speed was not inferior to a warhorse, but their fighting strength was much stronger than a warhorse. The leader of these frost wolves was a tall and abnormally strong young beastman. He wore heavy armor and held a sharp mountain-splitting broadsword in his hand. This weapon looked very crude and simple. It did not even have a handle to protect his hand. It was just a piece of metal. However, this piece of metal was a genuine holy weapon. The beastman's weapons were heavy, simple, and practical. This young beastman was no exception. His name was Osama, and he was the nephew of the leader of the Frost Wolf clan in the Beastmen tribe. At such a young age, he was already an expert at the peak of the demigod realm. He rode on the largest frost wolf with white fur all over its body. Among the various major forces in the main plain, the Beastmen had the most lax structure. Their armies were usually based on clans. The various armies did not belong to each other, and they were even constantly at war. In the continuous years of war, the Beastmen tribes such as the Bloodhoof clan, Warsong clan, and Frost Wolf clan had swallowed up other weaker clans and developed. Among them, the strongest was the Bloodhoof clan of the Tauren tribe. Shoo, stop! At this moment, as the leader, Osama waved his hand, and the Frost Wolf under him immediately stopped. Seeing this, the other wolf knights also stopped, showing their extremely high tactical qualities. Sir, why did we stop? Behind Osama, an orc raider who was about his age riding a frost wolf caught up and asked in a rough voice. He was Shak, who had grown up with Osama. He belonged to the Frost Wolf clan and was deeply trusted by Osama. Osama looked at the sky and said in a deep voice, "We're almost at our destination. Let's take a rest first." The Frost Wolves had strong combat power and were very fast. However, their weakness was also very obvious. They could not run vigorously for long periods of time like war horses. Since Osama set off from Forgotten City, the Frost Wolves had been running all the way until now. "Roar," Shak growled. "Sir Osama, we don't need to rest. Please give the order quickly. We need to fight. We need the flesh of the undead to feed our Frost Wolves." "No rush." Osama waved his hand and said, "We're running too fast. The other tribes can't catch up. A battle like this can easily lead to danger." The young Osama had a calmness and composure that was rare among the orcs, even though he was facing the undead that were vulnerable in the eyes of all the orcs. "Ha ha! Danger? What danger would there be when dealing with those pitifully weak undead? Shaq laughed and waved the ugly and irregular mace in his hand. These pitiful fellows. They'll soon beg for mercy under my big mace. Osama ignored Shaq. Shaq's loyalty was unquestionable, but he was too reckless and did not use his brain to think. The hundreds of knights also stopped. They jumped down from the backs of the frost wolves and took out bloody raw meat. They threw it into the air, causing a group of frost wolves to fight over it. These wild and untamed exotic beasts became excited when they smelled the fresh blood. They kept fighting over the raw meat that fell from the air, and their roars echoed across the plains. "Sir, will there really be a black crystal mine in the place we're going?" Shaq asked gruffly as he stuffed a piece of raw meat into his mount's mouth. His leader, Osama, was sitting on the ground, taking out a simple map and examining it carefully. "Definitely." Osama raised his head from the map, his ugly face full of confidence. "A few days ago, I received news that some mysterious undead bought nearly 10,000 black crystal coins worth of weapons and equipment in the Forgotten City. Nearly 10,000 black crystal coins? The undead are actually so rich?" Shaq exclaimed when he heard this. In Hawkant, the undead were synonymous with poverty and weakness. 10,000 black crystal coins was not a small sum. It was no wonder that Shaq was so surprised. Osama smiled and said, "I went to find someone to investigate. These undead are from the shadow bandits in the Sunset Mountains. There are only two reasons why they suddenly became so rich. One is that they obtained a black crystal mine and started mining it. The other is that they robbed a large merchant group. However, the possibility of the latter is not high." "Sir, are you saying that they might have found a black crystal mine?" A hint of greed flashed in Shaq's eyes. He rubbed his fists and said, "We're going to be rich." Osama smiled. He told Shaq the third reason, which was that the undead's influence had slowly begun to recover. Although it had not yet happened, there were already signs of it. The Shadow Bandits were one of them. The Shadow Bandits had gathered 20,000 people under the Sunset Mountains. Although it was not a large number, they would slowly threaten the Frostwolf clan's rule in Hawkant in the long run. The Frostwolf clan's chief, Long, did not let Osama stay in Hawkant for nothing. Osama narrowed his eyes and slowly put the tattered map away. He had already made up his mind. Whether or not there was a black crystal mine, the Shadow Bandits had to be exterminated. Roar. At that moment, a dragon's roar came from the sky. A huge two-legged dragon slowly descended from the sky. This was another powerful troop of the Orc tribe, the two-legged dragon riders, with god-level strength. The Orc rider on the back of the two-legged dragon bowed. "Sir Osama, a black crystal mine has been discovered not far ahead. It has been occupied by a group of undead." "It's true." Osama was shocked when he heard this. This proved that his guess was right. "Pass down the order. Everyone, speed up and get to the black crystal mine before sunset." "Yes, sir." "Haha. That's great. I can finally move my muscles." Shaq quickly mounted his mount and laughed. Osama smiled coldly. With the pitifully weak strength of the undead, Shaq would not even have the chance to move his muscles. Rumble. 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 Soon, the Frostwolf army's reinforcements caught up. Apart from the Wolf Riders, there were also powerful Orc infantry, Troll headhunters, Kodo riders, two-legged dragon riders, and a small number of shamans and Orc witch doctors. Chapter 851. The battle between Cronia and Shea had already begun. Both sides were exchanging blows in an extremely intense manner. The area where they were fighting had become a vacuum. At this moment, Cronia's body had turned into a phantom. Her speed was extremely fast. Shea's defense was extremely strong. Coupled with the nightmare beast under her, she made up for her lack of speed. Cronia closed in step by step, as though she wanted to cut her opponent down. Cronia was getting more and more alarmed. She wasn't afraid of Shea. Shea's strength was similar to hers. Even if she couldn't defeat her, she could still retreat. What made her alarmed was another feeling. This feeling was very mysterious. It was as though something was wrong, but she had deliberately ignored it. This feeling was very bad. It made her unable to focus on dealing with Shea. Wait! A light bulb flashed in Cronia's mind. She finally understood what was wrong. Where was Haend? Where were the other demigod experts of the Umbra Bandits? She and Shea had been fighting fiercely for so long. They should have shown up long ago to help. Cronia didn't dare to say for others, but Haend definitely would. This was because Cronia knew that Haend had always been infatuated with her. But where did he go? You have an ambush? Thinking of this, Cronia finally woke up. She gnashed her teeth and said, "At this point, even a fool would know that the other party must have another force to deal with her Umbra Bandits." The two figures finally separated. Shea waved the longsword in her hand. Her expression was still indifferent. "It seems that it's a little too late for you to know now. How many people do you have?" Cronia was shocked and furious. Her eyes looked as though they were about to spit fire. "Not many. Just me." Before Shea could answer, a voice leisurely came from a distant place. Cronia focused her gaze and saw a human wearing a necromancer's robe standing not far away, slowly walking out from a shadowy corner. Necromancer? Cronia was stunned. She didn't know why, but this human necromancer gave her an extremely dangerous feeling. This feeling was even stronger than the female Death Knight in front of her. When facing Shea, Cronia only felt that she was powerful. But when facing this necromancer, Cronia felt as though she was facing the Grim Reaper. Cronia took a step back, her face turning even paler. "You? Who are you?" "It doesn't matter who I am. What's important is that you're finished, and so is the Dark Shadow Thieves," the human necromancer in front of him said indifferently. At this time, his pitch-black eyes suddenly burst out with a sharp green light. Boom! Cronia's chest seemed to have been hit by a sledgehammer. She took a few steps back and sat on the ground softly. At some point in time, blood had already flowed out of the corner of her mouth. Soul attack! What a powerful soul attack! A trace of shock appeared in Cronia's eyes. The reason why necromancers were terrifying was because they had an endless array of attacks. Some of their attacks were extremely mysterious and strange, and soul attacks were one of them. Being able to use powerful soul attacks meant that he had a higher level of understanding of soul force. The necromancer in front of him was a terrifying figure. The necromancer in front of Cronia was Ron. He took advantage of the time when Cronia and Shea were fighting to sneak in and take care of most of the guards. He even took care of her subordinate, divine necromancer Haend. It had to be said that Haend was very powerful and wasn't inferior to Klein. But with Ron's current strength, it was a piece of cake. Under Ron's powerful spiritual pressure, Cronia could only surrender. At this time, Vitra ran out and took out a rope made of unknown material and tied Cronia's hands behind her back. "Are you all right?" Ron glanced at Shea and asked with concern. He knew that Shea had been poisoned by Cronia. "I'm fine." Feeling Ron's concerned gaze, Shea's heart warmed. After a short rest, the Death Knight's powerful recovery ability had already cleansed her body of the poison. Ron nodded. He had always liked Shea, but he didn't want Shea to marry him. He knew that Shea wouldn't. Their souls were already linked. She would only be Ron's guardian knight forever. Perhaps the relationship between the two had already surpassed love. Cronia and the others were dejected as they were escorted into the valley by White, Vitra, and Nicole. They saw the members of the Umbra Bandit gang lying all over the place. Their eyes were wide open, but their bodies weren't moving at all. What did you do to them?" Cronia glared at Ron. "Nothing, just a soul imprisonment. As long as you give up on the Black Crystal Mine and withdraw from the Setting Sun Mountain Range, I'll let you go, Ron smiled faintly. The Umber Bandit gang was also undead. He didn't want to kill too many of them, so he only imprisoned their souls. Give up on the Black Crystal Mine. Cronia's eyes were filled with unwillingness. The Umber Bandit gang had occupied this Black Crystal Mine, mined a large amount of Black Crystal coins, and used them to purchase weapons, equipment, and upgrade the stronghold's defenses. They had already tasted the sweetness. Now that the other party wanted them to give up, no one would be willing to do so. However, the situation was beyond their control. Cronia had no other choice. Miss Cronia, this Black Crystal Mine wasn't discovered by you in the first place. It can be considered as returning it to its rightful owner. Letting you leave unharmed is already good enough. I'll give you 3 minutes to consider. Otherwise, I won't be polite, Shea said coldly. She wasn't as easy to talk to as Ron. We're rich. We're rich. Lord Ron. Lord Shea. At this moment, White ran out of the stronghold's warehouse like a gust of wind. He was so excited that he couldn't speak properly. Black crystal coins, more than 100,000 black crystal coins, more than 100,000 black crystal coins, more than 100,000. They mined so much over the past few days? Ron sucked in a breath of cold air. No wonder both the Umber Bandit gang and the undead of Deathnell Town had risked their lives for this black crystal mine. The feeling of getting rich overnight couldn't be any better. You can leave now. Ron was in a good mood. He waved his hand and said to Cronia. At this moment, Cronia found out that the 2 humans before her were called Ron and Shea. That necromancer named Ron was far above Death Knight Shea in both strength and realm. However, Cronia was still unwilling to give up on the Black Crystal Mine. At this moment she clenched her teeth and coldly said, "Do you think this Black Crystal Mine will definitely belong to you? Hee, you are still too naive." Oh! Ron turned around, a trace of killing intent flashing in his eyes. He didn't expect these fellows to be so uncooperative even when they were at death's door. He had already let them go, so what else did they want? If necessary, Ron would go on a killing spree. In this main plane where the strong preyed on the weak, being soft-hearted wasn't a good thing. Don't misunderstand, I'm not talking about us. Cronia's expression stiffened when Ron stared at her, and her arrogance weakened somewhat. I'm talking about the Beastmen of Forgotten City. If they discover this place, you're finished. Cronia glanced at Ron and said, "Not only will you lose the Black Crystal Mine, but you will also lose your lives. This doesn't seem to be something you should be concerned about," Ron coldly said. At this moment, Cronia's expression suddenly changed. "Not good, the Beastmen are here." What? When Cronia said this, everyone was stunned. They clearly heard Cronia say, "The Beastmen are here." White and Vitra were shocked at first, but they quickly calmed down and sneered. "We just talked about the Beastmen, and the Beastmen are here immediately. Cronia, are you trying to scare us?" Ron's expression also darkened. No, this time it's true, the Beastmen are here." Cronia was so anxious that she almost cried. The mechanism she had set up under the valley of the Sunset Mountains, Undead Guard, had been activated. Through the eyes of the Undead Guard, she saw the Beastmen army rolling past. Plunderers, WRMS, Kodos, Shamans, Beastmen witch doctors, and the Beastmen army had always been the nightmare of the undead in Hawkant. They had the symbol of the Frostwolf tribe on their bodies. This was the Beastmen army from the Forgotten City's Frostwolf tribe. Swish! Shea frantically pulled out her sword and rushed forward. She said expressionlessly, "Miss Cronia, I don't care if what you said is true or not, but you talk too much nonsense." After saying this, she ignored the others and swung her sword at Cronia. "It's over." Cronia's heart was filled with sorrow. She didn't expect that she would die at the hands of an impulsive human because she talked too much. Wait. A voice stopped Shea's movement. To Cronia, this was no less than the sound of nature. Swish, a sound was heard. Shea's sword stopped at Cronia's neck. The sharp tip of the sword had already cut off a strand of her beautiful hair. At this moment, Shea turned her head and looked at Ron in confusion. What she said is true. A large number of beastmen have come down from the Sunset Mountains. There are more than 5,000 of them. Shea and the others hadn't discovered it yet, but who was Ron? He was a god. He only needed to scan with his divine sense to know everything. 5,000. The Wright siblings' faces turned pale. 5,000 beastmen army was enough to sweep through the entire Hokkant. They were beastmen, not undead. If they really fought, 50,000 undead might not be a match for 5,000 beastmen army. What do we do? At the thought of having to fight the beastmen army, despair rose in the hearts of the undead in Deathnell Town. They could be ruthless to the undead, but they didn't dare to have the slightest intention of resisting the beastmen, whether they were beastmen, angels, or elves. Looking at the faces of the undead, Ron understood. The defeat 100,000 years ago had left a deep mark on all the undead. It had completely destroyed the fighting spirit they relied on for survival. The undead had thoroughly become a synonym for weakness. Perhaps after another 100,000 years, the undead plane would no longer belong to the undead. These matters might be too far away. He had to think of a way to resolve the matter at hand. Ron admitted that the 5,000 beastmen army had indeed given him unprecedented pressure. He could summon 100,000 undead creatures, but that wouldn't be enough to resist the attack of the beastmen army. This was the mortal plane, not the Noah continent. Ron might be able to sweep through everything on the Noah continent, but he definitely couldn't do so in the mortal plane. What do we do? Ron's gaze fell on Cronia. He immediately had a plan. Miss Cronia, are you willing to fight against the beastmen with me? After this matter is resolved, you will benefit greatly. Ron said after pondering for a moment. You can take 30% of the black crystal coins mined here. There was no other way but to forge an alliance. If Cronia was smart enough, she would agree to this condition. A very constructive proposal. To put it bluntly, you just want us to risk our lives for you. Cronia sneered when she heard that. She slowly moved closer and stared at Ron. But Mr. Ron, think about it. Why should I believe you? Chapter 852. Roar. A loud roar came from the sky. It was the two-legged dragon knight of the orcs. At this time, he had already arrived above the valley, and his terrifying aura caused the two sides that were still fighting in the valley to stop. Orcs. It's the orcs. The orcs are here. Run. The appearance of the orcs caused the undead to panic. They scattered and screamed as if the end of the world had come. The two-legged dragon was over 100 meters long, and its body was about the same size as an ordinary dragon. However, it was different from a dragon in that its long wings were connected to the claws on its arms. A ferocious-looking orc rode on its back, casting a huge shadow in the sky. Its roar echoed in every corner of the valley. Looking at the two-legged dragon in the sky, Ron smiled coldly. He grabbed with his right hand, and a powerful soul force quickly condensed into a white-boned spear. Death Spear. Ron snorted and threw the death spear at the two-legged dragon in the sky. The death spear rose into the air like an arrow. Boom! The two-legged dragon in the sky let out a scream, and then fell like a kite with its string cut. Lord Osama, look! Sark pointed at the two-legged dragon in the sky and roared angrily, "They killed our two-legged dragon knight." The muscles on Osama's face twitched violently, and his face was full of anger. It was not easy to train a two-legged dragon knight, and it was an extremely excellent and rare troop. He had only brought 2 of them with him on this expedition to scout. How could he not be angry when one of them was lost at the beginning of the expedition? However, other than anger, Osama was also a little surprised. When did the undead become so bold? They killed his two-legged dragon without a word. Logically speaking, these undead should be trembling in front of the powerful two-legged dragon. Everyone, speed up. I want to wring the heads of these undead before nightfall. Osama's face was as calm as still water, and his words seemed to be squeezed out from between his teeth. Roar. An earth-shattering roar erupted from the orcs. They raised their weapons high and constantly beat their chests. How is it? Ron turned around and asked Cronia. Gulp. A sound was heard. Cronia could almost hear herself gulping. In the blink of an eye, a two-legged dragon of God's domain had been killed. This was simply too shocking for her. What shocked her even more was Ron's unhesitant and merciless killing intent. I agree. Cronia took a deep breath and looked at Ron meaningfully. But you have to release my men first. The orc army marched forward majestically and soon arrived at the bottom of the valley of the Sunset Mountains. From afar, they could see the orc flag fluttering in the wind. It was a huge wolf head. Orc Frost Wolf Legion. Ron's eyes gradually froze. Even though he was so close, he could still feel the strong killing intent in his heart. The undead plain belonged to the undead. When these tyrannical orcs stepped on the land of the undead, Ron felt humiliated, deeply humiliated. Ron carefully observed the orcs in the valley and discovered that these orcs were very different from the orcs of the Noah continent. They were much taller and stronger than the orcs of the Noah continent. They were also much more powerful. To be precise, they were closer to beasts than humans. However, there were some similarities. These orcs were valiant, crude, greedy, cunning, and cruel. They were like wild wolves of the grasslands, full of aggression. 5,000 orcs lined up in a row at the bottom of the valley. The momentum they created far surpassed that of 20,000 undead. This was a well-equipped main battle army. There were infantry, cavalry, catapults, two-legged dragons, and even Tauran warriors. The appearance of these powerful orcs in the Sunset Mountains caused great panic among the undead. Although they were few in number, they were able to display the most powerful combat strength. At a closer distance, Ron could even see the contempt on the orcs' faces. In the eyes of these orcs, these weak undead were not even worth mentioning. Some even thought that Osama was making a mountain out of a molehill. On the other hand, when Ron's eyes fell on Cronia and Haend, he saw fear, deep fear. Even the Wright siblings were pale. Ron could even feel their legs trembling. Are you afraid? Ron took a deep breath and asked. No. We are not afraid. Your Excellency Lich King. The Wright siblings said with trembling voices. When Ron took out the legendary Calamity God's staff, they had already confirmed Ron's identity and were determined to follow him. Cronia and Haend were also smiling, but their smiles were somewhat unnatural. If it were not for Ron's powerful strength suppressing them, they would have turned around and left long ago. No one knew better than Cronia how terrifying the orcs were. Just over 200 orcs could chase down and beat down 10,000 undead. 5,000 orc elites were enough to sweep through the entire Hakant district. The Sunset Mountains were not far from the Forgotten City. The Shadow Bandits and the Frostwolf Corps had conflicts from time to time, but Cronia always lost more than she won. Cronia took a deep breath. Your Excellency Lich King, are we really going to fight? What do you think? Ron's eyes narrowed as he stared at her. As long as she said the word no, he would kill her immediately. As if she felt Ron's killing intent, Cronia's heart trembled. She immediately lowered her head. Your Excellency Lich King, I am not questioning your orders. It's just that the orcs are too powerful. We should retreat to the valley and use the terrain and the ghost tower to kill them. No! Ron shook his head and rejected Cronia's suggestion. He pondered for a moment and made a decision that exceeded everyone's expectations. Shea. Ron turned to Shea and said, Lead 5,000 undead into battle and teach them a lesson. 5,000? Hearing this, Cronia couldn't believe her ears. What would be the result of 5,000 undead fighting against 5,000 beastmen? Even if she used her toes to think, she could imagine it. Relying on the advantageous terrain such as the valley and the ghost tower to fight against the beastmen, they might not necessarily win. This guy actually wants Xia to lead 5,000 undead fighting against the beastmen? Crazy, he must be crazy. Cronia thought sadly in her heart. Yes. Compared to Cronia, Shea was not too afraid of the orcs. In the Noah continent, the orcs did not have the slightest intention of resisting the Scourge Church. On the contrary, she only felt that 5,000 undead was a little too much. Shea did not waste any time. She led 5,000 undead into the valley. Among these 5,000 undead, there were more than 1,000 from Deathnell Town and 4,000 from the Umbra Bandit. Oh my, so many orcs! Are we really going to fight these orcs? There's no way we can win. Seeing 5,000 orcs standing in front of them, the undead felt as if their feet did not belong to them anymore. Fear appeared on their faces. Shea rode on the nightmare beast. There were still traces of battle on her body. She faced the 5,000 orcs in a row with an indifferent expression. Perhaps sensing Shea's calmness, the 5,000 undead calmed down. Ron also held his breath as he stared at the situation at the foot of the mountain. It was a fair battle. 5,000 undead against 5,000 orcs. His decision was not based on a stupid idea, but because he wanted to see the true fighting power of the undead. They actually came out. Damn it, they actually have the guts to come out. Damn undead. The orc army that was about to attack the valley suddenly saw the undead surging out of the valley. They cursed angrily. Interesting. Osama was stunned for a moment. Then, a sinister smile appeared on his face. Ever since his Scourge army fell from its peak 100,000 years ago, the undead had never faced the orcs head-on, no matter how many of them there were. What made them regain the courage that they once lost? This was a question worth pondering. However, Osama did not dwell on this question. He did not care about these undead at all. He smiled coldly and waved his hand, making a gesture. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.